Mayor DeMeyer.
Here.
Vice Chair Paul Mayer. Tyrone Stammers.
Here.
Susan Claus. Nancy Taylor.
Present.
Amy Kutsky.
Here.
Kurt Studer. Absent. Mayor Mays.
Here.
Council President Garland.
Here.
Councilor Young.
Here.
Councilor Rosner.
Here.
Councilor Griffin.
Here.
Councilor Kuiper.
Here.
Councilor Browse.
Here.
Tonight's meeting will be a working and listening session with the department director presentations. We will have time for general public comments at the beginning of the meeting. If you'd like to speak, please do fill out a public comment form and give it to Jean. Jean is sitting up here in the corner. I will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through me, please. Towards the end of tonight's meeting, we will also have a public hearing on state shared revenue with time for public comment on the use of shared revenues. And now our first order of business is to approve the April 5th minutes for the City of Sherwood Budget Committee. May I have, or do we have a motion to approve the Budget Committee meeting minutes?
Will we approve the meeting minutes?
Second?
I second.
Any discussion required? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Katie?
So at the first meeting of the Budget Committee, we are required to elect a new chair and a new vice chair. So I would like to, let me go back to the legalese here. Per ORS 294.4149, the Budget Committee is required to elect the presiding officer at the first meeting when they receive the budget message. I would like to request Chair Meyer to open the floor for nominations of the chair position for the fiscal year 2018-19 budget cycle. As a reminder, committee members, please refrain from voting on the nominations until all nominations have been made and then accepted or declined.
I open the floor for nominations.
Myrna, did you enjoy doing it last year?
I have enjoyed being the chair, yes.
I would nominate you.
I second that nomination.
Any other nominations? Okie dokie. Way to go, everybody. Well, then let us go ahead and vote. All in favor of Myrta Meyer to continue on as chair, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you for your confidence. Before we get started tonight,
We do have to elect a vice chair as well. I do apologize.
My apologies. All right, I open the floor.
I would like to request Chair Meyer,
Okay.
since that has not changed, to open the floor for nominations of the vice chair position for the fiscal year 18-19 budget cycle.
And I now officially open the floor for nominations.
I nominate Paul.
Second. Any other nominations for vice chair? And Paul, are you willing to serve as
I am,
vice
but
chair?
I have a question. My term expires this year, so if I don't get renewed, what happens?
So
Like the new chair? Or
we would
vice
have to
chair?
elect a new vice chair if you were not renewed.
Seems fine. Okay. All in favor of Paul Mayer serving as vice chair?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Welcome again, Paul. So before we get started tonight, we do have some new budget committee members, and I would like to just remind everyone that the purpose of the budget committee is to look very comprehensively at the budget that the staff has put together. All of our staff has spent months and months working on this budget. They are highly skilled experts in all of the work that they do. And with that in mind, it's important for us not to get caught up in the details and line items of each budget item, but rather look comprehensively at the budget. If there are issues with programming that you have any concerns about, those are the items we should really focus on as a budget committee. And just to give an example of what that might look like, Last budget cycle, we had a number of deferred maintenance items that were proposed for our consideration, and we had to take a hard look at what, if any, of those items would be included in the fiscal year 2017-18 budget. So those one-time expenses we had to decide on. Those are the kinds of issues that we need to look at. But I would really encourage the Budget Committee not to get too wrapped up in the details of particular line items, so we can really get through all of executive staff's presentations this evening. Our focus tonight will be on the general fund, and that is all I'd like to say for now. So, at this point, I will now open the meeting to accept public comment on the 2018-19 City of Sherwood budget. Jean, has anyone? No. Is anyone here? No. Okay. All right. So we don't have anyone. So we'll go ahead and get started. Joe, would you like to start with an overview of the budget, please?
Sure. Thank you. Before I talk briefly about the budget overview, I want to make sure everyone's got important components. So Katie sent out late yesterday afternoon. Jean sent out the agenda with the minutes, but more importantly, there were a series of questions that came in that staff responded to. So I want to make sure people were aware that it wasn't just the agenda and the minutes of the meeting, but there were responses to the various questions that came in. So hopefully those responses were satisfactory and informative to folks. You can say something. This is a team effort, Katie, so.
So just so you know, if there are additional questions or follow-up questions on those, we've added a couple lines to the agenda, and at the end, after we review the 5-year forecast, there's a discussion time. So if possible, if we can go through the director's presentations, address all of the departments, then if we want to elaborate on any of the questions or do follow-up, we can definitely do that. If there's a question that you want follow-up that specifically deals with a specific director, then please feel free to do that at the time the director is up here.
Thank you for that clarification. The other thing that I want to make sure folks have handy is this one-time list of projects, because we always get into those kind of details in terms of what are we doing in terms of different projects, one-time expenses, not ongoing expenses. So. And the entire budget, I think also we tried to, at the request of some of the budget committee members, put the detail sheets close to the department description. So matching them up was a little challenging, but they're certainly a lot closer than what we had to do last year. So hopefully that was helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
You've got some positive feedback on that. So I, unlike some city managers, do not spend time going over my budget message for you. You've had it for a while. Hopefully you've read it. There are some key things that I want to highlight that I think when we get into the details that we're going to have some discussion on that are important in this budget. So the things that I think are important cost drivers for this budget. First and foremost, the code enforcement changes that we've talked about pretty much for 3 years are once again proposed to be implemented in this budget. We can get into that when we talk about police and or community development, because those are the two departments that those proposed changes affect. But that's in here. That's basically shifting the code enforcement program from the PD over to the community development department. And that is an add in terms of positions. So I wanted to make sure folks were aware of that, and I'm sure we will talk about that. We are also adding staff, or proposing to add staff in the court and in the police department to implement the speed camera program. I'm sure we will talk about that somewhat tonight, but we are expecting once those cameras to go live, the amount of traffic in our court, for lack of a better term, to be extremely high, and we wanted to have adequate staff to address that volume. So those are additional charges or costs in this proposed budget. This budget implements the recommendations of the compensation study that the city has been implementing over time Katie, in her report, talked about the union contracts and where things are. Management and supervisory would be implemented by approving this budget. That's a significant increase to our personnel costs. I'm sure we're going to discuss that through this process. So, and then I think I also want to mention all of the list of items that were deferred last year in terms of maintenance have all been either caught up in this year's budget cycle or proposed to be caught up in next year's budget, and we're not deferring any maintenance. So anything that's been identified as a project that we were planning on doing in the coming fiscal year is funded in this proposed budget. So with that, unless there's any just general questions, I'd like to just start diving into the general fund by department and go from there, if that's okay.
I think that's perfect.
So first, we're going to start with administration, and Katie, I think you're going to start on the non-departmental. So
Yes, so there's one department at the beginning.
1 second, Katie. Just so in the event anyone is watching tonight's meeting and you're looking online maybe, we're going to go ahead and start on page 51. And for all of us here, that might be helpful as well. And it's the administration page.
Yes, so as we go through this, we're going to break it down into little pieces that are not that it's not broken down in the budget book, but by department. And so this is, what I'm talking about right now is the non-departmental. It's the basic overall admin. In your books there, it's found, the inserted page that we put in there is found just before page 47. So it's the page immediately preceding page 47.
Okay, my
It's
apologies.
the inserted, that's fine. And it says non-departmental and Department 10 at the top. This is a department where most of the general fund revenues go that are not specific to like building or police. This is where taxes go, where franchise fees go, the type of thing. So this is where you will find the overall revenue that can be used pretty much for anything. So your property taxes, your franchise fees, your state revenue sharing. Not a lot to talk about in this department on the revenue side. Property taxes are fairly consistent with a little bit of growth. State revenue sharing did go up a little bit. And at the end of this meeting, when we do the hearing, I'll have a quick presentation on which items went up and which went down, so that in case you have questions on the specifics of that. Other than that, as far as revenue goes, the only thing to note is that there will be a correction in the projected revenue coming from the school district. So we signed the purchase and sale agreement last Friday, and the school district, because of changes in the roadway and the roundabout, ended up needing a few more acres than what we originally thought. And the original agreement had a certain price per acre. So when I figured it into the model and repaid back the street capital fund for the amount taken out and calculated the interest that they'd earned on that, it comes to about $950,000 instead of the $824 that's projected there. Now that number won't be exactly $950 because we have to calculate exactly the interest and all of that on the day that we settle. But that will be a significant difference that we should plug into the beginning balance before we approve the budget. So you will see an amendment for that amount. As far as the expenses go, there really isn't a lot to say because this is where we have things like copier leases. We have, just your basic, some postage, a little bit of electricity. So there's really not a lot in here. There are no people in here, which we know that people are what drives most of the costs in the city. So not too much to talk about in this department.
Okay.
So,
Can we ask questions or you want to wait? I can't remember what you just said.
it depends on the type of question. Let's see what you got, and I'll shoot you down or I'll answer.
Watch out, she's feisty.
In facility and equipment, 6322, we jumped to $10,000 proposed.
Yes, so this has to do with the tenant improvements over at Smockville. So while there's nobody in there, it's a tax exempt space, But once there's a tenant in there, then we're required to pay property taxes on it.
I have one question. On the revenue side, 4011, 4012, there's a significant increase in the prior property taxes, but a decrease in the interest. What causes that?
That is purely trying to figure out what will come in which categories. So what we really want to look at in property taxes is the overall amount. It's accounting for what we receive from the county, and for us still trying to get things in the right buckets as they're coming in from the county. So
Wouldn't the increase of the prior taxes cause an increase in the interest as well?
honestly, I budget to around the thousands. So it was 3,000 this year budgeted, 3,000 next year. To me, that's not a change. The projected for 3,400. Those are the types of details that I don't budget to that level because it's not worth the time for me to spend on $400. I spend it more on the 400,000.
And just for clarity, the projections that are in all these columns, those projections were established back in January.
Right.
Just to give you a time frame. So here we are in May, so.
So Katie, I have a quick question, just from a more of a high level on the property taxes. They tend to go up 3% a year, and this was about a 1.8% increase.
So the calculation's a lot more complicated than just the percentage. So we use the assessed valuation. We take into account how much we're going to request for the URA. We have a projected growth. We have the 3% accrual. There's an entire workbook that goes through, and we're
Forgot
usually
about the
pretty.
URA. That's a big chunk right there.
So,
yeah.
so the URA is a separate calculation that we have to do, and then once we have the number from the URA, then we plug that into the other calculation, and it affects the number.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Shall we move on to community services?
No, we're not. No. We have a lot more.
We have a lot more in
administration.
admin, so.
Okay. Well, you're welcome. Now it's like, yes.
Okay. So I would like you to now go to the City Council Department, which is, if you go to page 52,
Yeah.
there's the budget detail page, but more importantly, right next to it is the council budget. And you'll see overall, it's not a large budget. The whole budget is proposed to be $20,000 if you flip on the back side. It's very comparable to what the current year's budget is, about $65 difference. So not significant changes in that budget. I just want to make sure if you have questions about the council's budget. I would like to highlight that the council rules have been changed recently by the new council, that certain expenditures over a certain amount that are unusual now have to go to council for approval. So there's another level of oversight that the council has kind of imposed, which I support. So
I'd like to jump in on the city council. Just one major thing that we changed for city council is that in the upcoming year there are no funds for the Rose Festival float. Yes,
correct.
Thank you. And the reason that the overall budget has not changed significantly is that we put the city council training and travel budget back up to where it had been in the past. And the idea is that it's very important, or we feel that it's important for council to network with other cities and to remain on top of what's happening in the economic world and with other cities and counties, and we can't do that without the budget for the travel and the training.
Correct.
So that's where the money was moved to. So that's why the overall budget for council hasn't changed significantly.
And the primary training, I think, for counselors is the League of Oregon Cities Conference in the fall. We have a number of brand new counselors, and I always encourage them to attend that conference for a variety of reasons. There's some trainings that can take place. There's one in June that we are hosting that maybe some of the counselors may want to attend. It's a new session for the league that talks about city council, city managers, and department directors all working together as one team. And it's a new training that actually I'm hoping one or two counselors can attend. Any other questions on council? All right, we're going to move on to the city recorder, and Sylvia's come on up, and I would like to offer her an opportunity to talk about her budget. I know there's one item that she wants to highlight in her proposed budget overall. So Sylvia.
Thanks, Joe. So the one item that I'd like to highlight in this year's budget, which is different from previous years, is the item on, if you have the sheet for the one-time expense, there is an $8,500 for records management software. So
On the additional
on
page.
the one-time.
Yeah.
I don't have a copy of that. Is there another one of those? No, I didn't. I printed my own. I didn't get the one that
Here,
was
you can borrow mine.
on the desk.
It should be in the pocket of your book.
So we're working off this. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just before you dive in there, just a note as to why it shows on there under IT, but we're having Sylvia talk about it. It's software, but Sylvia is the expert who will be using this software, and that's why she's talking about it right now.
So thank you, Katie, far from being an expert. But what you'll see on this one-time item is $8,500 for a records management system, which is a system that the state currently uses. It's an organ records management solution, basically called ORMS. The state implemented the system 10 plus years ago. A lot of the current cities are utilizing the system. It is a license fee based system based on number of users. So what the strategy that I did in requesting the $8,500 is to look at the current dollar amount that we're paying for our current records management system, which is $8,500. Taking that dollar amount, not to have any additional increases, and seeing how many licenses we can purchase for that same amount. So what you'll see is the one-time expense for $8,500, and then you'll also see as you get into the IT's budget is the $8,500 that they have there for the current software that the city has. The reason for the one-time expense and the current expense is to allow for a transition of the softwares and for the migration of the records to be moved over.
Sylvia, from my understanding, that one time plus the IT number covers support, covers all the seats you need, and training.
It covers training. So the fee for the license is $37.02 for the new records software. That covers training, support from the state, and from the consultant as well, which is Chaps Consulting. So that pretty much is bottom line fee, $37 per user per month. So it's, again, and we can increase those users monthly as we need to add an additional license. So the total cost, like I said, the $8,500 would basically buy 19 licenses. Right now we've identified roughly very lean 15 licenses. We can absolutely use all 19, but we're going to start with the minimum and see how far we get.
In a little bit, just more context. Sylvia asked for this in last year's budget, and in balancing the budget, I didn't propose it in the budget, so she's back again, and I think we can afford it this year. We need an improved system, and I think this is a worthwhile investment for the organization. So, the other thing I want to note, if
Joe, can I just?
Yes, go ahead.
I just refresh. That's an important point because this software is approved in terms of for records management in the state of Oregon.
Correct.
Safeguarding.
Correct.
The current system is not. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, good.
It's one of the reasons when we looked at options that this one stood out. And a number of other cities are already using this. Westland uses this, Hillsborough, Milwaukee.
The Sherwood School District has the system.
Yeah. So we've got other users when we maybe have questions about how to use the system, best practices that we can tap into. So, The other thing I always like to look, her budget actually, as opposed to the current adopted, is a slight decrease. She is exceeding her budget this year, but that is mainly if you look at elections. We had a number of special elections, and those costs are much higher this current year than in a normal year. So, and that is certainly not Sylvia's fault. So, any other questions for the city recorder on her proposed budget?
Thank you very much, Sylvia.
City manager's budget. This is just as some additional background. This is my position, a portion of the assistant city manager's position, and all of Tina's position, the admin, or is it a portion?
Yeah,
It's all of hers. So in terms of staff. So the other addition that we added this year is at the bottom, the FTE count. So you can kind of see how many FTEs within each department and what we've done in years past. So I think that's a new wrinkle that we've added that folks have requested. Overall, my proposed departmental budget is a slight increase over the current year. Most of that is in salaries. And can answer any questions you might have there. The $24,000 one in 6198, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, is to bring back a lobbying firm, correct? That's correct. Mayor Mays has actually just got back from DC with a number of other mayors. There is significant federal dollars in the current upcoming budget and in future budgets that there are opportunities for the city to tap into those federal funds. Part of that is using a lobbying firm that knows how to work the system, for lack of a better term, in DC, and I think there's tremendous value there. So, we want to reestablish that in the upcoming fiscal year.
Joe, has that lobbying firm been picked yet?
No, we will have to do a RFP. That's something that needs to happen fairly soon. There's aren't a lot of firms, but we may get 3 or 4 proposals. The firm that we have used for years is a very good, solid firm, but we'll see what they put on the table in terms of proposals.
Okay.
So, thank you. And that will be a council decision in terms of who we ultimately pick. So.
Great.
And on the salaries, you said how is that broken down then? You said that some of it was due to the increase?
Well, if you look at just salaries, again, if you look at the bottom line, total personnel services, in this current year, we're at 372. Next year is proposed to be 384. So that's largely the assistant city manager's salary increase due to what's in the compensation study. And Tina's as well. And you'll see that across the board. Basically, that salaries are all going up more significant than in a normal year. And it's the COLA as of July 1st and adjustments to salary based on the compensation study.
And the contracts with the 2 unions
are completed.
And are completed. No one in the city manager's office is a part of the union, so.
And so the adjustments are strictly off the compensation study. These aren't stepped up, like merit pay or anything like that?
No.
Great.
Okay. City Attorney's Office, Mr. Soper is already up here, so Josh, go ahead.
So this is really just a status quo budget. It's still a relatively new department, so we're fine-tuning things as we move into, I think, our 3rd year now. But really, status quo, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to address them.
It's actually a small reduction, it looks like, compared to current year.
Yep. I think the biggest change is in training and travel, just kind of figuring out what it actually costs and what kind of legal conferences there are in the area and fine-tuning that.
Thank you for all you do.
All right.
That was easy.
Human Resources.
Sure. So this is fairly status quo as well, but I do want to point out a few things. If you take a look at, so we're on the page after page 56 in the budget book. Miscellaneous revenue, you're probably wondering what revenue comes in human resources. This is actually a refund that we typically get from SAFE for our workers' comp insurance. They've consistently been giving refunds every year. And so what we have done is guessed at what we think that's going to be. It could be zero. We aren't absolutely sure. But if you take a look down in the expenditures under line 6223, we've offset that revenue with some anticipated costs. That's something that we just started doing this last year, and it didn't show in the budget because we had it coming out of a different expenditure line item. But the intent there is to kind of buffer some of these insurance claims that we get. And, we don't have high claims history, and that's one of the reasons our insurance rates are low. But we do have, fender benders and things that just happen, and we're responsible for the first $15,000 of any issue. So we're just trying to buffer that. In the past, before last year, that would get charged to the department, and that wasn't in their budget anywhere, and so that certainly caused some issues. Just kind of going down the.
Was that 15,000 per incident that we're responsible for, or is that a deductible?
That's per incident. So we can lower that significantly. I think down to 5,000. We've chosen not to because our claims history in the past has just been so low. We just really haven't had high claims.
And the refund, is that for the workman comp piece? Is that what you said?
It is, yeah, and which is spread out throughout the entire organization. If you take a look at line 6023, you'll see that that's based on payroll, and it gets spread out throughout the budget. So there's not a particular line item for that insurance cost. Kind of going down the list, you'll see liability insurance went up 7.5%. That's just basically what our insurance provider, CIS, raised the rates this year. They had a lot more claims, all across, not the city of Sherwood, but all across their cities that they provide, and so that's a 7.5% increase. One thing I wanted to point out is in line 6298, that $1,500 of that $3,500 actually shows up in a one-time expense over on the list. So if you take a look at the one-time expenses under HR, you'll see $1,500. This is for implementing a background check program inside of NeoGov, which is a program that we're actually going to launch here this week, and which does all of our recruitment. It allows us to save a significant amount of time. So one of the modules that they have that you can add is a background check. Currently, we have a code section that allows us to do that through the police department. That is antiquated and not a good way to do that. So we want to implement that, and there's a charge for that, a one-time charge for that. They also charge $35 per background check, and that is included up in 6198, other professional services, along with some other costs. So really that was all I wanted to point out, unless you guys have questions.
Thank you very much, Tom.
All right. IT is next, correct?
Yep, he's right behind you.
He's multitasking, so.
Good evening. IT this year is outside of a handful of one-time projects, which are largely kind of replacement projects, status quo budget as well. Happy to kind of go through these one-time expenditures. The big one that you see on the list there is the sand replacement. The sand is a storage system that we use. It is probably our most expensive asset that we own in IT, and it holds all of the city's data. And we need to replace that because it is end-of-life. Portions of it are end-of-life in August of this year, and then the rest of it's end-of-life, I believe, in next year's budget. So we'd like to get ahead of that and get it replaced this coming year. Security penetration test is just a continuation of our security program. We did a security audit, I believe, 3 years ago. This is just a continuation of that. We should do these on a regular basis just to make sure we're staying up to speed on our security. Sylvia mentioned the records management system, business license software. That's a replacement. Our our current system, our vendor stopped supporting it, so this is just a replacement of that system. Servers, those are replacing aging servers that we have. And then the backup software is to add capacity to our current backup software. We're currently at capacity, and I'm leaving that with a little asterisk in the sense that we may look at even a new product as opposed to adding capacity. So that is the one-time expenditures. Happy to answer any questions kind of beyond that.
What will that backup give you as far as capacity percentage?
So right now our current license is a size capacity, right? So we are using more data than we can actually back up. That's not a bad thing. We juggle what we back up, but we need to be able to add more capacity to back up more data, essentially. Does that make sense?
No percentage, or I mean,
I don't have the percentage of what we're backing up now in that license. What my goal here is to try to get away from a capacity-based license and move to something that's really more just, you get to back up how much ever data you have. It's not based on how much data you own.
Okay. Have you, and this might not be the forum, but done the analysis of the pros and cons of having servers on site versus cloud?
Right, yes, I have informally, and still it's very expensive to go to the cloud. We don't spend a lot of time and effort maintaining our servers in the sense that what a cloud provider would provide you.
Right.
We do spend a lot of time in the application level and supporting that, and typically what you see is people just moving their servers to the cloud, and we replaced all of our servers, our primary servers, last year, so they all have a 5-6 year lifespan on them. We'd be losing quite a bit if we moved those away right now.
Is it safe to say, as those age, and the cloud becomes?
Definitely on the server side, and I fully expect that this may be our last SAN that we purchased, and that when this one ages out, that the cost for cloud will come down to a level where we maybe don't need as big of a SAN, or maybe we need one at all.
So, go ahead.
I noticed in the, somewhere in the packet, in the security penetration test, it's a 3-year program.
That's not set in stone, but that's kind of the schedule that I'd like to do them at.
Is that safe considering the amount of threats?
Well, I think certainly having them more frequently is good, but they're very spendy, so it's kind of weigh the cost and the benefit. So usually when we do the penetration test, there's a whole laundry list of action items that with a small staff we can't tackle them all immediately. Obviously we take the highest priority stuff first and we address those, but usually these are big projects and sometimes have budget implications too.
Have there been a lot of threats to the system?
Nothing that I know of. I mean, other than just what most folks see. I mean, there's always threats, right? I mean, we all hear the news of patches and vulnerabilities coming out, so we're always addressing those things, but nothing, no compromises that I know of.
Tim, did you have a question?
Actually, two.
Okay.
Unrelated questions. On the, when you talked about end of life for the current SAN system, can you define that? Is that they're no longer selling it, or they're no longer maintaining it, can't get parts anymore?
No longer maintenance on the hard drives this year, and in I think it's in December of next year, it's the brains, the controllers.
And then on the, do we have, as we look at replacement software, new software, do we have any kind of policy of a cloud-only approach, so we're not perpetuating? Because you can move servers to the cloud, but ideally you're just buying an application that's based in the cloud, so you're not dealing with servers and all that.
And that's the level of cloud that I think I want to push us towards, where we're not moving just the hardware, because the hardware doesn't take a lot of time for us to maintain. It's the application. So when we can move the whole stack to the cloud, it makes a lot of sense. And actually, even if it costs a little more on the front side, I think you save it on the back end, staff and support and servers and all the infrastructure that supports it.
I'm sorry, one more question. In the new software for city recorders, cloud-based? Good. Excellent.
I have a question. On the business license software,
Yeah.
will this new software have an application in it that sends out and tells people that their business license is due?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Because we
Yes.
did talk about that
Yes.
when something was like,
Yes.
okay. And then when you get the payment in, it'll,
should, yeah.
cross against it.
Everything that
Okay.
we looked at, and I've been intimately involved in that project, but it's all been online, it's all hosted, cloud-based, payments, online payments, online email notifications for
Renee has a question for you.
So I believe I heard you say that by the time the lifespan of the SANS equipment comes to term, you'd be ready to possibly go to the cloud. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
So what's the lifespan of the SANS?
I'd hope to get more than 5 years, but I think 5 years is a pretty safe bet. I think there will always be a need for us to keep some storage on site, but I think the more we move our applications, and especially our critical ones, the less important, the less amount of data that we need to hold here, and we can actually put our storage in the cloud. So that may be a viable option as well.
So, one more. So, and maybe this is not for this.
Is it about the overall, like, budget, his budget?
Yeah, and,
Okay.
and moving forward, yeah.
Okay.
Just real quick. So, with that in mind, in a 5-year horizon, at some point we should probably be putting together a plan for what that looks like to get
Correct.
over 5 years, because we can't convert all those products on year 5, right?
And there's kind of informal discussions about moving some of the big applications to the cloud. That's a product that's becoming available as a big storage and computing resources. So that's a perfect use case for the cloud.
Thanks, Brad.
I do want to just go back to Paul's question about security and everything. Brad and his team are spending more and more of his time on security issues. We now have how many characters for our passwords?
A lot.
14 or 15, which, quite often drives us insane to come up with something that works. But the reality is it's the right thing to do. He spent a whole day the other day dealing with something that he's like, because we have such long requirements, it's harder for people to get in and break into our system. So
How often do you change them?
Too many.
too many.
Yes.
Yeah.
You said 50 days?
60 days.
60 days?
Best I hate it too. But
Well, I'm not saying we should change it. It's just,
It's the way it is.
it's the way it is.
Okay. Any other questions for IT at this point?
Thank you for all you do.
Councilor Rosner, very good. This is your bread and butter, so I know. I know.
So finances,
Okay, finance.
finance is
Katie.
next. Most of what finance does is people. So we do have the increases from the compensation study. There were some fairly significant increases in the finance arena. There is also expenses in the software area. Having a financial system, it's important that we have someone to be able to address issues, design reports, all different things. I still would love to have a new financial software, although my team would kill me if I did another transition. But we have found that we do need to have money in the budget for that professional support, just to always have available for us. Audit services, we were lucky, or we did a good job and came in under budget with audit, so it didn't take them quite as long as they anticipated. So I'm hoping that this year will be the same. And that is, the amount budgeted is according to the contract that we did an RFP, we got a new contract, so that amount is set by contract. And the only other thing really that affects our budget is are the tools that we use for transparency. And so we have the OpenGov tools where we want to get the stories running more so that the public can see more into our financial data. We've been very good about keeping it up to date, and we just want to make that connection to the public more. So the price for the software is in there. And then the financial forecasting, which has been so helpful for this budget. I've spent hours and hours in that software, is also in here. We've had it free up until July 1st, but starting July 1st, we do have to pay for it. I believe it's $7,500, which is not a lot given how much more clarity it gives us into the financial projections. And that would be an ongoing cost. It's something we can use, we update on a monthly basis.
So Katie, is that those costs in 6198 or am I incorrect?
Those are in 6198, yes.
So that's why there's an increase.
Right. It's not actual software. I mean, we're logging into the cloud, I guess.
Yes.
So we don't own anything.
Yep.
They just provide the service to us. So any questions on finance? Okay, then I'll move on to court. Court is a whole different beast. You'll see a significant change in the revenues for fines. This is related to the speed cameras. And I'll let police talk about the impact on traffic safety and the importance of them. But there is a financial component to that. This number has been split apart into two, and a piece of it is in one-time revenue, and a piece of it is in ongoing revenue. Am I 100% sure of the number? I'm 100% sure the number is not right. But I can't exactly tell you what we will get because the law is new in Oregon, so we don't have any basis for what will happen when these cameras are turned on. What we've used examples in other states. We've used a very conservative approach. We've used data from our the red light cameras, the amount of people. We've measured the number of cars. We've done counts for an entire year. We've done how many tickets it would have done if every person who sped through the intersections for an entire year had gotten a ticket, and we took a teeny tiny percentage of that. So we've done a lot of work on the numbers to get where we are. But again, this is a new project, so we do have to remember that these are going to need to be fine-tuned as we get more data. And also, there will be a spike, and then there will be a drop, because the whole intent of this is to modify behavior. And so we don't know where it will plateau. So that's why in this revenue, some of it's considered one-time and some of it's considered ongoing.
So I would say, I would also say this is probably an item over the first 6 months of the new fiscal year we're going to be watching very, very closely. And if we're actually projected too high, there may need to be budget adjustments in light of that. I think the numbers are pretty conservative, but we won't know until we turn those cameras on and tickets are starting to be issued.
When does that happen again? What day?
Around June 1st, if everything goes as planned.
Susan, did you have
So the 2.47, the 550 is in addition to that? Is that?
No, the 550 is part of that.
Okay, it's included in there.
Yes.
And so the 1.17 is before the new camera?
That's correct.
Okay. So
So 1.3 about is what we're expecting to get from the cameras
for this year, and then
for this year, and then we anticipate it to go down to closer to 700,000 and stabilize there based on what has happened with the red light cameras and what percentage it's stabilized at. So then from there we look at the costs, and you'll see that the personal services has not increased as much as you might expect it to. And again, this is partly because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. So we're trying to be conservative. Honestly, I believe court could use 2 more people. I think it's going to be very tight. But what we're doing is between finance and admin and court, we're all pulling together and seeing who can cover what duties, who can back other people up, so that we can be the most efficient possible. And what we've done is you'll see the receptionist position has been excluded from this budget. So rather than have a receptionist position, we're divvying out all of the duties between everyone. That individual who was already doing a lot of court duties was reclassified to court clerk and is now exclusively working for court. And so the increases between 300 and 346 in the budget for court is not a full FTE. Obviously, it's just a part of an FTE, especially considering that we have the compensation study in there too. So we've successfully moved people around, and what they're doing to really limit the costs on personnel in court. If the volume is too high, we may have to come back for some temp services or something like that. But we don't want to anticipate that. We think that we've done really well with cross-training people, and that hopefully we'll be able to manage with the people that we have. Other than that, the costs, we were very pleased with the response to the RFP for the speed cameras, and it came in about $120,000 less than we had originally anticipated and that they had originally quoted us. So we were very pleased with what ended up coming in on the red light services. You'll see 260 there. It actually came in at 240, but because I didn't have the final number when this book was created, I like to always put a little more in case there's some cost that I didn't anticipate. So it's actually at 240.
Is that the same company that's doing it now?
Yes, it is the same company, and that's why there were savings, because they didn't have to remove the hardware and put new hardware in. They're able to tie into the hardware that's already there.
And that contract is scheduled to be in front of council, authorizing signature next week on Tuesday.
Thank you.
We want, oops, sorry.
Did you have a question?
When we approve this or finalize this, would we want to reduce this by the 20,000? Or leave it
Likely. We have an entire package of, and we'll talk about that when we get to the 5-year projections. We have several different things that we're,
One last question. The bank fees, they're doubling? Is that in anticipation of
because we expect double the amount of tickets, so that would be double the transactions
All right.
per transaction.
And that's why interpreting services.
Right. Same thing with interpreting
Twice as many
services.
tickets.
And also, there should be a professional services that goes up, yes, in 6198. We may need a pro tem judge if the judge is on vacation or something to keep the court going. So that's why those increases are in there. It's all related to that same program.
Thanks, Katie.
One question.
Oh, sure.
What percentage of the revenue are we taking in form of credit cards?
I do not know.
We can cover it later. I think you know where I'm going with that.
Great. Okay. Moving on.
Okay, I think if I'm correct, that covers the admin division, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So next, we would like community services to come up. And we're skipping over community development. So as a reminder, Christian's 7, I think?
C7.
So Kristen Schweitzer is the Community Services Director. She has a whole portfolio of very popular programs and activities and in a variety of buildings, but she also has her respective directors here. So if she can't answer it, her library director can answer it, right, Adrian?
Yes.
So.
So we're just going to dig right in and start with library.
Thank you. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. So for revenue for the library, as you will recall, the majority of local library funding comes from Washington County Cooperative Library Services, both from the county general fund and a 5-year levy. So this accounts for 83% of our expenses, and it also includes a 3% increase each year of that 5-year levy. 15% of our expenses are paid by the city, not counting administrative overhead. There are just a few highlights of the expenses. So under personal services, there are no proposed changes to our FTE. All those changes are from the compensation study. All of the library staff were affected by the compensation study proposal. And then, in a good way, yes. And then I'll go to line 6198, which is other professional and technical services. This is not a new expense. It's just splitting out programming presenters from our programming supplies, which I'll point out when we get further down. And then I'll go on to line 6216, software. This has 2 additional products to help with summer reading registration. That's considered a one-time expense because we're expecting that WCCLS will pick up that as a countywide service the following fiscal year. And then we would also be adding a scheduling piece of software. And I'm going to go down to, actually turning the page, we've got 3 lines that are being merged together. So those are 6403, periodical stock, which is our magazine subscriptions and newspapers, 6404, so all the books that we check out, and 6405, which is the movies and music. Those are all being merged next year into one line, and so that total is $110,000. It's actually only an increase of 1,200 total. It's just merging. And then my last point to highlight is line 6409. That's program supplies. So I mentioned we were splitting out program presenters. Program supplies, the actual increase there, if you add them back together, is only $400. We offer 600 programs a year.
600?
Yeah. 623.
Less than $1 a program increase.
Listen, I just want to say something really fast. I do a lot of training for all the cities around the area here, and when I have people like from the Beaverton Public Library, they know this woman's name, and they talk about Adrian like she's a rock star, and she is.
Yeah.
Obviously, I just had to mention that. She's a rock star.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I had a question. The one-time project, the online registration
Yes.
for the 1450, is that also included in your?
Yes. Yeah, 6216
Yeah.
is the line item. So it's
Yes.
sorry, I'd already turned the page. 6216.
Yeah.
So that includes a number of things, but the summer reading software is the 1450. We have about 2,000 people that sign up for summer reading each year, and that's going to help us track all of that and communicate with those people.
And that's already included?
Yes. Any other questions?
Thank you for your hard work.
So moving on, next we have events and volunteers, and really that's a pretty status quo budget. The biggest change you're going to see again is in personal services. We had staff that were impacted again positively by the compensation study, but there's really no other significant changes to the budget. So just as a reminder, this was Music on the Green, and then also our volunteer program and special events that we do throughout the city.
Question. I noticed back in the court discussion that we're going to be substituting the receptionists with volunteers.
Correct.
Have there been any recruiting done today?
There has. In fact, our volunteer coordinator has an interview scheduled for Monday. We're in the process of trying to recruit volunteers right now. And the volunteer program has grown tremendously.
Okay.
Especially taking on the senior center. We have equivalent of, is it now 3 or 2 full-time FTEs over there for volunteers. So at any given time during the day, there's 2 or 3 people there working the front desk and helping out in the kitchen. So we have about 50 regular volunteers over there. And then we're also going to be recruiting, as you said, for the front desk.
Fantastic.
So if you know anybody.
Yes.
I think they just put out a call, didn't they, on social media today
Yes.
for
Yes.
some additional
Yes.
volunteers, so hint.
Yeah, so we're getting great bang for our buck out of our one volunteer coordinator right now.
Okay.
Ready to move on to Fieldhouse? Okay, so moving on to Fieldhouse, not too much has changed in the budget. I did want to point out on the first line item, 6361, there was an error. If you look under projected.
That's 4361.
4361, I think.
Oh, sorry. What did I say?
43, yeah.
That's all right.
It should actually be 75,000. That number was input incorrectly, so it shows 41,803, and our projected revenue will actually be 75,000. So just wanted to point that out, and
And that will
already
be
made that
fixed.
correction.
Yep.
Katie's updated that, but just so we didn't have a huge drop off there.
Yes.
So your net income or loss projected is?
shifts significantly. I can't do math
It,
quite that.
it's about 17,000 as opposed loss. It's about $30,000 difference.
Which we hope to make up, obviously. Again, we had some staff impacted by the compensation study over there. The other thing that is in this budget is under one-time expenses, and that's to update the website, and that is expected to be about $5,000. So you'll see that on 6198. Yes.
And is that something that you have somebody outside do that, or is that our IT department?
It's our IT department works with AHA, who does our city website, and also did the Center for the Arts website and does all of our updates. And then trains staff to do regular updates, but they do the implementation and creation of it. Any other questions there? Recreation sports, so this is fields, gyms, and basically any of the recreation sports activities that happen outside of the field house. The one thing that I was looking at is, again, in the very first line item, looking at the facility rental and just seeing that there's some fluctuation there. And Katie and I talked about that today, and that's really based on how that revenue is split up and divided once it comes in, because some of it goes to the field replacement or the turf replacement fund, which is under capital. And then there's a significant decrease projected for next year, and that's because of all the work that's happening with the bond. We're expecting that fields are going to be closed, gyms are going to be closed, and we're not going to be able to rent out facilities as we typically do. So hopefully we'll bring in more than we anticipate, but we're just trying to be cautious and know that many of the facilities are going to be under construction. Any questions? No. Okay. Center for the Arts.
Ask you to pardon my sniffles. I know. No, I'm not going to. Okay, so this year we are continuing to see increased revenue at the Center for the Arts. We're seeing a lot of usage, places being used. So we're trying to stay status quo with expenditures. There are a couple of things I want to point out. One is under 4701. We should have some money there. It was missed somehow. I missed it. But we're expecting at least $5,000 for private, if not more. So you know that
current year.
In the current year for projected 2017-18. So just know that. And also on 61.2. So the reason we've gone up in regular salaries and wages in 60.11. It looks like our seasonal wages were allocated to that regular wages instead of under seasonal. So that's why you see that little bump. It's just a allocation difference. So know that that will be next year. That's what we're going to be looking at. So it runs right about right.
And just so that you all know, this is one of those issues with the software that we tried to set up a separate pay thing to split it out for the seasonal wages. We're still working on that because we really want to get those seasonals apart so that we can see them separately. But for right now, we haven't been able to get it to work. So that's why you may be seeing it in other departments too. So just so everyone knows that's why. Okay, there you have it.
Just so you all know, those seasonal wages are tied directly to rentals. So we don't have anybody on staff if there isn't somebody paying for them. So just so you guys know that. That's all included in rental revenue. So we're offsetting all of those costs. Another thing I wanted to point out was computer, under minor equipment, 6503, computer communications equipment. We're looking at, computer software purchase, 6504. We're looking at getting new software for the Center for the Arts. The software that we purchased 2.5 years ago is really not living up to our standards. It's not giving the correct customer service that we need. So we went around and shopped and actually found something a little bit less expensive yearly that a lot of other communities are using, and it's going to be an excellent, excellent choice for our community. And actually, it's going to take a lot of load off of staff capacity because the current software doesn't do everything we need it to do. We're spending a lot of time doing things manually that we shouldn't be doing. So it's really going to be a step up. So that's also in your one-time expenditure sheet. And the great thing about this new software is that our software subscription fees, $62.16, is actually going to be going down. We haven't put that on there yet, but that line item for 2018-19 is going to be lower. What we're looking at right now is about $4,800 per year as opposed to $8,000 per year. So we're looking at, it's going to be a great change.
So you're saying it's going to be less for the current year, but greater.
So the one-time purchase of the software and then our yearly subscription going on will be much less.
Okay. Okay.
The last piece, oh, so sorry, Kristen. The other great thing about this software is Public Works will be using it for park reservations. So we're actually paying for some of the implementation and some of the purchase this year. And so actually that one-time expense will come down a little bit, but they'll be able to use it for online reservations of parks.
Are you charging them?
Yes. Well, he's going to pay.
He's
for
paying.
it
Okay.
right now. He has money and
Just
I don't.
teasing.
So yeah.
But it's a really great software. It could be used at other facilities too. So it's going to be a great choice.
And we have high hopes that it's going to help finance be able to figure out what's happening with money at the Arts Center and the parks reservations, because we spend a lot of time trying to get things to balance because it doesn't produce, the current system does not produce good reports, things do not balance, and we have to go through individual receipts, and it just is a nightmare. So we have great high hopes.
From the system. It's just ridiculous.
We have very high hopes for this new software.
The last thing I just wanted to point out was on that second page as well, $63.98. There's a $5,000 under miscellaneous facilities equipment. That was a light bulb for our projector. And it's just the kind of, we have a really incredible projector that we use a lot. So these are just kind of starting to be some of the charges that are going to be coming up just for maintaining. So we'll be working on a plan over the next year to get some plans in place for maintenance and upkeep of some of the incredible equipment that's over there.
Expensive
What's the
bulb.
life of that light bulb normally?
It's 3 years, 3 to 5 years. Yeah, it went a little sooner than we expected, but it gets used a lot. So we were expecting it. No, I was not expecting it. But here we go.
Thank you so much.
Question?
You said since we're going to be working on this for the next year, does that mean you're staying?
Which is a lot to do.
I do.
So I think most folks know Maggie will be, just a minute, I'm sorry, Mary, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Maggie will be leaving us shortly, unfortunately, but she's leaving a great foundation for whoever takes her place, and she will be greatly missed. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
Definitely.
So for the future, for your successor, what do you think is needed to grow the usage of the center so that it's continues to be a anchor of our old town and of our community, but then from just a dollars and cents standpoint, we have a five-digit figure loss instead of a six-figure digit loss.
Right. Well, so we're in our third year. We're going to hit 50% cost recovery, which I'm blown away that we were able to do it. I have like stars in my eyes. Other art centers and places around usually aim for 30% cost recovery for facilities like ours. The rental revenue for the retail space, that's going to make a big difference. When we have a full year of that, that's going to bump us way up into 60. And also just maintaining that production rentals are welcome. I think we're really looking for somebody to replace me who really understands that the place is used because it's user friendly. It makes sense.
Right.
So it's affordable. So it really creates accessibility. Our calendar is accessible to production rentals and then other rentals. So the calendar's filling up. we're bumping those rentals up and up and up and up. I think just keeping an eye on that. I think the software is going to help to make sure that we're using our staff time to the fullest. I think you've got it, as far as art centers goes, you've got a very successful art center. So I think just making sure that it's accessible, making sure you're paying attention to revenue. Our revenue generating programs are a much higher percentage than non-revenue generating programs, though the non-revenue generating are important. So there's plans to put other kind of more ticket-based programs in there, like adult-focused concerts or things like that. So that's another program area that could open up.
Awesome.
At an art center like this, unless you shut down all programs and just have it be a rental facility, it's not going to make money because it's services.
Yeah,
But-
I mean, right. I mean, the big picture goal, I believe, by most people that was around when we were conceiving it, was to be close to.
Yeah.
But you have other benefits and what's not reflected in any of these budgets, and I've talked to Katie about it, is somehow tracking and logging when people use it for free, namely city councils or
Yeah.
The
city
library.
managers.
Yes.
The library uses it.
Yeah, just so that we know that, okay, this, so many evenings were occupied by other departments, and so that was a lost opportunity for the Art Center to have revenue there. So
And-
I think there's a value of tracking that.
The other thing I've talked to Kristen about after some conversations with some other council members, I think we should look at our fee schedule. We put this together approximately 3 years ago. I think it's time to kind of take a look and see how we are in the competition, and there may be some adjustments that we can make. You always have to be careful. You don't want to raise the fees too high, then it becomes cost prohibitive and people shy away. But I think we need to look at that. I share the same concern that you have, Mayor, and I've told Kristen from day one I want that place to be busy and used first and foremost, but I want to get as close as possible to breaking even. So I share that goal, and I think we need to take a look at that. And with the tight budgets that we're going to have, we need to be starting to look at things like the Arts Center. So,
But as I concur, as I mentioned, it's there to be an anchor, to be a bright shining star, to bring lots of people in from within the community, but also surrounding the community to our old town. So you're going to leave it in great shape. Wonderful beginning.
And I will mention that we also have a friends group now, which I think we'll be able to look to for the future to help offset some of those costs, and especially when you get to materials and stuff like that. But they put on the gala every year, and they've just been up and operational for a couple of years, and brought in $25,000 the night of the gala, and they put that all back into the facility. So I think helping them grow and is another opportunity there.
Maggie, thank you for all of the contributions. That
Chair, I have
Yes.
a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So-
Go ahead.
And thank you, Maggie, for, as the mayor says, leaving the facility in great shape. You've just been an incredible capstone on that facility. Quick question, though, about how we could potentially track in the future. I'm interested to know, of the percentage of time that the facility can be open, what percent is actually used of the total percent that it can be open? And then in addition to that, what is the comparable percent cost or revenue per hours used? Because I'd like to know if the facility was fully engaged, do the fees that you're generating, the revenue that you're generating for the full life cycle of that of a daily or weekly schedule, is that going to make the budget? Does that, you know what I mean? Can the new software do something like that?
Yes, the new software
Okay,
can.
great.
I think one clarifying question, if I
Yeah.
can, would use, so any kind of use, so a class or
Any
a rental
paying use,
or any kind of use.
right? Because it'd be nice to see if the facility was maxed out, and you know what kind of uses there are. Is it a $40 use for 3 hours? Is it a $150 use for 3 hours? You can play with the numbers and play with the times that it's open to really evaluate where that balance
This new
might be.
software is going to
Okay.
do that.
That's great. That's really good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
I think it's a great
Yeah.
question.
Okay.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, though. Yeah.
So now I want to invite our new senior center manager up, Marjorie Stewart Senior Center. This is Maya Martin Burbank. And Maya I put together the budget, but I just wanted everybody to have an opportunity to meet her and answer any questions, and we'll try to not put her on the spot too much because she's really only been on the job 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. So
watch out, we're going to grill you. She's a pro.
And she'll be introduced again at the council meeting next Tuesday.
That's
so.
great.
And I've heard great things about her from the community.
Yeah. So Nancy was just asking if Maya could do a quick little introduction and just give a little bit of her background. So that's okay.
Because she's new.
Yeah.
So can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. Yeah, so I've been working in King City for the last 16 years with King City Senior Village is what it's called now. Prior to that was Pacific Point Retirement. I've worked with the Tigard Senior Center, Meals on Wheels program there, worked with the Lions Clubs, the King City Charitable Foundation, a bunch of local charities to help fundraise and provide services to seniors. Wow. In a nutshell.
Okay, so as everybody knows, last year was the first year that we really had a budget dedicated just to the senior center that didn't fall under public works or maintenance. So there really are not many significant changes or hardly any changes really to the budget moving forward. The one thing that I will point out that we've done differently, that we haven't budgeted the same, is how we're doing meals. At the beginning of this fiscal year, we were paying a caterer to come in 3 days a week and provide meals. And now we've reallocated those funds and brought in a part-time kitchen coordinator and chef. So you're going to end up seeing a reduction in materials and services, which is where all of the catering fees are coming out. We just can't say for sure what that's going to be since we've only been doing this for about a month. We're still trying to get a handle on what the food is going to cost. Our goal is to get it as close as possible to the $4 a meal that we're charging, and to really try to get that number in check. That will change. That number will come down.
Is that going to be employee-based or is that contractor-based?
He's an employee. He's already started. Dominic Sachet is his name, and started about a month ago and is doing a fabulous job. We've heard nothing but wonderful things about his cooking, and just fits in wonderfully over there.
So when you said the number, which number are you saying specifically? The current year's projected number or
The projected won't change too much because we just finished the catering and we are still purchasing food. The proposed budget number, the $36,300, I don't expect that we are going to spend that much money on food throughout the year, and that's mainly what that was for. But what we're still trying to gather is through menu planning, figuring out what everything's going to cost, what that number is really going to be, and I didn't know for sure that that was going to be our direction when we put the budget together.
What did we end up hiring that chef as?
He's 25 hours a week. And then Maya is about 32 to 35 hours a week. So we took that from a full-time position, brought it down, and then brought on the kitchen coordinator chef.
I have a quick question. So in the past, we were getting a subsidy from the county, and I think Meals on Wheels was coming through that. They lost that. Do we know when that contract's up with the county, and will we have an opportunity to get that subsidy back?
So we as a city, we're not seeing any of that money. That was all going to Meals on Wheels. And do you want to talk about that at all? Did you find out anything about, is it a 2 years left on the contract?
It's 2 years, yeah. They're on the third of their fifth year of that contract. It's a comprehensive contract that includes many sites in Washington County and at-home services as well as their congregate meals. It's something we're looking into to see if that's something that could be possible in the future. But we'd have to definitely expand our service in order to meet that goal.
And one of the reasons that we lost the contract is because we were obviously only serving our center. But since they did submit a proposal to serve all of the county, they won the contract. So it will just depend on what that looks like moving forward and if that's an option for us to break off or not. And there's restrictions, there's pros and cons. You do get money back from the federal government per meal, but you also have to, there's some restrictions on what you can serve, how you can serve it, and so we'd have to look at it and decide if it was really worth the savings.
Yeah, it looks like 2020 would be the first
Correct.
year we could make that decision. Okay.
The one positive that's here is just the low number on the revenue side is very, very low, and there's lots and lots of room to grow.
Exactly.
Good
Lots of room to grow, lots of service provided.
Well, Maya, welcome.
Plus
to Sherwood.
the reviews from the center have been glowing for the last 2 weeks.
I think the marketing efforts that I'm starting to see just on Facebook and the posts and things that are happening there, I think if you continue doing that, those kind of changes and people discover the center, I think those numbers are going to go up, Mayor. There's opportunity there, as you say, so.
And you don't have to be a senior to eat there, so come on down.
For now. Then we get wildly popular. Yeah.
I do want to point out while they're still there, there are 2 one-time items on there, just so that when we get to the end and we're going through and trying to decide that you can connect it to the senior center. The office furnishings are because we do have 2 people there. They need a place to work. So we don't have everything we need. 1,500 just gets the basic office furniture. And then the phone system, the senior center is not currently on our city's phone system. It has a separate phone system, and we'd like to tie them in to be able to transfer calls, to have them on our same system. So this just allows us to be integrated on the same system. So that's what those 2 requests are.
And then someday down the road, it's not in this budget, I would like to get that center on a card key system like the rest, because right now we still have the old-fashioned checkout keys, and we need to get that facility upgraded. That's not inexpensive, so that's on the horizon as well.
Joe, when you say that's not inexpensive, can you give me a...
Brad?
That's not included in
That's
this
not
budget.
included.
So, yeah. That's
There
it,
may be
yeah.
monies coming in.
Yeah, for future
Yes.
future budgeting, that would be good. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you give a range about what it would cost to implement the card key at the public, or at the 5 to 10?
Million.
It would cost that much just to
Replace the door if someone breaks it, because it's really hard to relock, as I've tried, but so, break that door.
When is or if it has already started, I don't know, the remodeling going to start taking place? And is all that being able to be covered by the CDBG grant?
I believe, I'm looking at Julia, I believe 15,000 is coming out of the general fund. The work can start after July 1st. Does 15,000 sound correct?
So that will be covered under Public Works in the facilities. There are the amounts that we'll be covering in the one-time budget. So
That's
if
a
you'll
match.
sit tight, it's
Yeah.
in Public Works in the facilities budget.
But it's coming.
It's coming.
It is coming.
We got 108,000, yeah.
Are there any more questions? Thank you very much.
Welcome.
To both of you.
Welcome, yes.
I think that's everyone, correct? Thank you, Kristen, and your team. Chair, do you want to keep going? Do you want to take a break? What do you want to do?
Let's keep going till 8.
Okay,
And then we'll
that's
take a
fine.
quick break.
Let's move on to community development. Julia. We're going back in the book.
So community development, as you may know, or most of you know, is planning, building, and engineering. And
Page 60.
So I'm going to start with planning. All of our budgets are fairly status quo, although we're obviously highlighting the differences. One of the things that you will continue to see is that we received a grant from the state, DLCD grant, to do portions of our comprehensive plan, economic opportunities analysis and housing needs analysis. Some of that is showing as revenue this fiscal year, and then there's 20,000 that's showing next fiscal year. So that's showing up, and then the federal grant that you're not seeing carried forward is the end of the tannery project. We're seeing charges for services a little bit lower than this year. A lot of that is actually reflected in the moving of the business licenses from planning to finance, because that was handled by the receptionist. That's line 4381. On the expenditure side, we do have some continued increases in some one-time expenses. Most of those, or all of those, are related to the comprehensive plan for the planning department. The comprehensive plan, other professional and technical services, as well as $20,000, which is our match for the DLCD grant that we received. That will help us with visioning, as I said, the housing needs analysis and economic development.
May I interrupt really quickly?
Please.
For the one-time expense comprehensive plan, in total, I can't remember the number that we talked about to do the whole thing.
For
the
that we talked about last year, it's about 500,000.
That's what I thought it was between 5 and 6. Okay.
And we have, I was actually talking with Erica, the planning manager, today. That's the 200,000. She's like, this is what she can do with 200,000.
Right.
Carrie is our senior planner that's working on the comprehensive plan, is doing a great job. Erica's got a lot of skills and experience, which is great. We did get some grants, and so we're continuing to kind of cobble together and do what we can, which is kind of what we talked about last year doing. The other thing, as everybody's mentioned, on the expenditure side is the personnel increases because of the compensation study primarily. We also have half of the code compliance officer being funded out of the planning department, which I think actually is in this budget is the half is out of planning. Is that correct?
Half's in planning, half's in police.
Half's in planning, half's in police, yes.
And then the other thing I just wanted to point out, the FTE, some of you guys may know this, but we don't actually have 5.1 FTE in planning. It's a reflection of work done in planning, so there's some engineer time that when we're doing pre-apps and land use applications comes out of the planning. A little bit of me, depending on the projects that are being charged, comes out of planning, and then we have a third of an admin that is divvied up between the 3 departments. So I just wanted to point that out.
And this year there was some of the receptionist time.
Right.
So the reason there's no increase is that the receptionist went away and the code enforcement is added, and so they net out because the business licenses were moved to finance, the receptionist went away, code enforcement is added, no net change to the FTEs.
Any questions on the planning?
Did you have a lot of significant increase for the salaries?
You can see, I think they're all pretty similar in terms of the increases.
I'd rather address salaries, the compensation study on its own at the end if we need to, rather than try to address it department by department. Especially because we have people that are split between all different departments, and if we try to get to that level of, it's not individual people because they're split between all different departments.
That's reasonable.
Any questions on plan?
No.
All right, moving on to building. This reflects a significant increase, as you can tell, in building permit revenue. There are a lot of projects going on. It was actually a little challenging just to figure out what's coming in this year versus next year. A lot of that, frankly, is the high school, which is a very, and not just the high school, but the bond measure, because there's a lot of very expensive projects. We have the fun center. There's just a lot of very large and high value projects, and the building permit is based on the value. So that is a significant increase in our revenue projections. And actually we feel like it may still be fairly conservative. So we're pretty confident in that number, which we can't often say, but pretty much everything that we assumed we're pretty certain is going to happen. It's just a question of whether or not it happens this year or next year.
And I think you can notice that by driving around town, you see a lot of construction activity, and that's just going to continue as we get closer to the summer construction season. So,
we do have some expenditure increases. In part, we actually we had a half-time we have 1.5 building permit specialists. The half-time person left, and because of the increased activity this year as well as what we were projecting next year, we actually, through the supplemental budget, made that a full-time building permit specialist. So we've got 2 building permit specialists, as well as the building official, and then a third of our admin, and then the other half of the code compliance officer will be funded out of the building department, which will be a tremendous help for Scott to help enforce building code issues. That's something he really hasn't had as much time as warrants, to make sure that people are getting the permits that they need and doing things like that. Then the other things I just wanted to point out as far as expenditure changes is on 6113, which is other professional and technical services. The building plan review, that went up significantly, but that's again because the building plan review fees go up. And currently our contract with our outside plan reviewer is a percentage of the plan review fees, which is, so when those go up, that also goes up. That may change, so we might have some differences in the next budget or supplemental.
and that may change because of the state of Oregon interpreting things differently and requiring us to do certain things to be a certified program that are different, that may end up costing us more. So I guess stay tuned in that area. The council's aware of that, but the citizen members of the committee may not be. And then I'm going to put Katie on the spot as I look at where we will end up at the end of this year, the $455,000 to the black, and then another projected $366,000 to the black in this. We're getting closer to being able to develop our own fund in this account, correct?
Yes, we're getting closer to it. We're not quite there because of cash flow issues and things like that, but we're getting closer. The goal would be to split this out of the general fund because there are legal requirements on the money that is comes from building, that it cannot be used for other purposes. And so a lot of cities have just created their own building fund.
But you can't do that while you're in the red.
You can't do that while you're in the red, and you can't do that while your balance is too low to maintain through the slow months. So we would have to make sure that there's enough balance in there to maintain.
I got a question on the workers' comp. It looks like it's projected to bump up quite a bit from this year's projected, and in noticing the trends, it looked much lower than what we're budgeting for. And if I look at the other budgets, in comparison with the full-time employees, it seems high.
So workers' comp is, again, one of those personnel things that we kind of need to look at as a whole. Part of the reason for workers' comp being adjusted is that we have to put in the rates at the beginning of the year based on what the total rates are. And then all of a sudden we get a bill, which is never the amount that it was, because it's adjusted for a lot of different reasons. And so then we do the adjustments, and each person, depending on what they do as a job, has a different rate. And so certain departments will have higher rates than other departments. If somebody goes out in the field, like an inspector, they'll have a much higher rate than an admin person will. So the rates are really dependent on the person and the type of work they're doing, but also it could go anywhere from 50% of what we budget to the whole 100%. And we literally don't know until we get that bill. And then I believe, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a few months in, then we get one more correction of the bill. They do a true up or something. So it's a little bit of a convoluted thing, but I have to budget the full amount because we just don't know.
Yeah, that correction is actually for the previous year. So
Okay.
they do an audit of all of our numbers, and true up every single hour that every employee worked at whatever rate, and charge you that, or come back and ask for more money at the end usually.
Any other questions on building? So engineering, similar to planning and building, the budget reflects just continued strong revenues due to development activity. One thing that I'll point out, and Katie I think is going to get to it in the 5-year forecast, is I believe our project inspection revenues are actually a little bit low. I think that was just a communication issue. We're actually thinking it's about $50,000, no, about $40,000.
$40,000 more, yeah.
Than that, so which is
In the current year?
No, in
no,
next
for
year.
the projected year. Let's see, 6102, engineering and architectural. I just wanted to kind of point out why that's lower than we've projected this year. This year we had increased that because of anticipated on-call work for the high school traffic and things like that. So we brought that back down, but we still needed to maintain enough that we can have on-call plan review or traffic review for private development projects, as well as needed for if we had a vacancy or anything like that. We also, I want to point out on 6209, it looks like a significant increase in travel and training, and that's primarily we actually haven't been doing the full amount of trainings that we've been needing to do to maintain the certifications that the engineers and have to maintain, and so they're at the point where they really need to do those trainings or they're going to get into issues. So that's why that number is so much higher than you've seen in the past. Office supplies, I'm sort of getting down into the weeds, so if that's too much, sorry, but I was just trying to highlight things that were big changes. Office supplies are about double what we budgeted this year, and some of that is just we need SIM cards for our digital cameras because we take so many cameras out in the field for inspections. There's just some things like that that we need. Door hangers for when we do outreach, that kind of stuff. And then one of the one-time expenditures is iPads for notebooks for the inspectors to take out with them in the field. Right now they don't have anything like that.
And then I'd like to go over the engineering reimbursement because you'll see a significant change in that. So we're trying to look at how overhead is allocated. And we still need to do a real comprehensive look at that. We haven't had time to get down in all the weeds, but I took a look at engineering because I was struggling with understanding why engineering was doing all of this work for other departments but wasn't recovering the cost. If they're always working on projects or for other departments, they should be recovering a lot of their costs, and that wasn't happening. And it looks like the overhead allocation was not accurate because the overhead was taking out any revenue that had come in. Well, the revenue is supposed to pay for part of the overhead. So anyway, the way it was calculated was incorrect, and it comes up with an overhead of closer to 45% rather than the 23% that was. And 45% is much closer to what I've seen in other cities, what I've seen for engineering chargebacks for overhead. So I'm much more comfortable with that being more accurate. And what's included in the overhead is what I call the allocable, the payroll that you can allocate. It's the PTO, the training, the department admin that's charged to engineering, their training and the supplies for engineering. And that's really basically it. It's just the amount that affects, that's the overhead for that. And that comes to 44%. And so we have not been recovering that in past years. And so I set up the new model to properly recover the costs for engineering. And that may mean that there may be some cost overruns on some of the capital projects. We'll have to see how these go because this is an increase compared to previous years. But I do think it's important that engineering be recovering the proper costs and that we truly be assigning the costs of the engineering work.
And
So I
are
have a-
those funds coming from enterprise funds, a variety of?
Those are all
depends on-
coming from enterprise and capital funds. So anytime a project is done, so say we work on a street and the engineers have to do the design and they do the review and all of that, all of their time is capitalized and put into the value of that street and then depreciated over the life of the street. We haven't been capitalizing the administrative overhead piece, enough of the administrative overhead of engineering.
So that will mean some maybe truing up or reevaluating of cost to do projects overall because you're
So as we
that
look
percentage.
for, it shouldn't have too much of an effect on the next year's CIP. So I've looked over those as we go into the future, and we'll be having a work group looking at how we handle capital projects and how the process works through us and the form itself and how it's designed and all of that. And that is a piece of it. The overhead.
And the other thing I'll just point out, and we kind of touched on it, is the FTE that's listed here is general fund engineering FTE. There's actually 6 folks in the engineering department, but a lot of that time is charged to other projects or other funds.
Is that why there's an actual reduction in the personnel?
Right.
Because we're anticipating more being allocated to departments.
Well, it's actually showing a slight increase in FTE from what's adopted this year because we're anticipating doing more private development review.
Yeah, I was talking about the dollar amounts on these.
Oh.
Personal services, it's down, not by much, but.
So the way we allocate engineering, each person is assigned a certain number of hours on each project that we're planning to do. So say the city engineer, so say Bob is spending a lot of time in the stormwater capital, then his salary will now show up in stormwater. And if an engineering tech is now working in the general fund. So it really depends. There's this huge model of which hours are going to which project. And so it's split out based on the specific hours by project. So
You kind of foresee the projects for the year and then.
So there's a whole model for the entire year. Yeah. So if you want to look at it, come talk to Bob sometime. When you have a couple days.
Well, no, it made sense because you have in the department we just looked at before, it's going up higher than the rate of the increases, and that's because of the change in the distribution.
I just saw Russell volunteer to do that.
Right. I second.
Oh, it's like Kenny's model describing, I have no desire to go near that, whatever that is. He went like that.
Carefully.
So the last department is basically me, community development management. There's really no significant changes as far as expenditures or revenue other than the personal services.
That FTE, is that just a portion of your time? Is that just you?
It's me, and the reason why it's not one FTE is that I do charge my time to capital projects or other, like planning for comp plan related things.
I thought it was a shorter work week or something.
We don't have
by
enough work for her.
by 2 hours, 4 hours.
Come in at 10.
Yeah.
Sure.
That'd be great. Any questions?
Kurt, did you want?
I don't have any for Julia, but I do for Joe. I noticed that with the engineering that we've seen an increase in travel and training, almost threefold. Other budgets, I know, as I recall from last year, there was a reduction in overall training and travel to monitor that, or to keep the budget balanced. But with this spike, do we foresee in the other budgets where we are going to need to ramp up training and travel in order to maintain certain certifications and things like that?
The department that comes to mind would be more Craig's department because a lot of his folks require certifications. Do you want to talk about that at all, or
When it's time
when it's time?
Sure.
So
Okay.
But just so you know, when we put the budget together, we put the travel and training back to where we felt it needed to be. So the cuts that were made last year were taken back out. We started with where they were before the cuts. And so any additional cuts that were made individually looking at what the department needed this year. So we didn't start with where we were last year. We started with where we needed to be.
Okay.
So just so you know where we.
But generally, it'll be higher overall because we're back to where we were, at least in this proposed budget.
Thank you, Julia. I'm going to actually change my mind. This is a good place for us to stop and maybe take a quick break. So let's get back together in about 10 minutes.
Awesome. Oops.
Going to call Josh back up for just a quick minute.
Found something, Josh.
Oh my word, here it comes. Here it comes.
Dun, dun, dun. I'm just kidding.
Wait, what page are we looking at, Mirda?
We're going back to his.
Me.
Oh, just you? All right.
Just looking at you. All eyes on. No, I'm just kidding. So, one of the only reason I've called you back is a point of clarification, not because I have any issue or concern with your budget, but I think it deserves some attention. As we, as a city, are reviewing contracts and entering into new contracts, even with the school district and others, can you tell us a little bit about whether you are invoking the help of outside counsel or if all of the work is being done in-house?
6104? Is that what you're talking about? You're done? Yeah, legal. I have it circled, but I didn't ask about it.
Yeah. So we do the vast majority of all the legal work for the city in-house. We have that line item for outside legal services as needed. Actually, about half of that is set aside for if we needed to do a personnel investigation, or hired an outside attorney to do that, something that I can't do, right? Because I want to have an independent third party doing that investigation. The rest is for whatever special expertise we might need during that year. So far, in the time that I've been here, 95% of what we've had done with outside counsel has been land use issues. We've had a number of LUBA appeals where we needed somebody who really knew how to handle those issues. We had a small surety issue at one point that I think we spent maybe $1,000, $2,000 on. And then we also set aside a little bit of money for bond counsel each year, just when bond-related questions come up. That's been it, really.
Yeah.
Everything else has been in-house.
And I think maybe, Joe, the reason I bring this up is because the notion of using outside counsel in prior years was a really big issue for this city. And I know that there was a lot of citizen questions about why and how we do what we do. So thank you for all that you do and for sticking within the budget. And that is all.
And so just on that same point, the amount projected or that we believe for this year is at the budgeted amount of $33,500. To date, we have spent $1,231.
Yeah.
So we project that high because if something happens, if there is any kind of litigation that has to happen, it will suck that up so fast. So if we project to not use it, then it's going to happen. So the hope is that we don't use it,
right?
Or that if something were to come up that is so time sensitive that that Josh needs another lawyer on his side to step in, then that's why then the cushion is there. So that's one of the only accounts where we do that.
And like Katie said, it's because those things are so unpredictable. Like you find out that you need to do a personal investigation on Monday, you need to have them start on Tuesday or Wednesday, right? We can't predict it ahead of time. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, George.
That's it. So you weren't in trouble? No, not at all.
No.
I'd sue you if you was.
So as Captain Hanlon comes up, just a point of reference. Last year, you may recall Captain Mark Daniel presented the budget to the Budget Committee, and Chief Growth said, next year's your turn, Ty. So this is good training for our captains to put the budget together and to answer questions from the Budget Committee that you might have about the police and public safety budgets. So that's why you see Captain Hanlon.
I guess it's time for a break.
Yes. That's okay. Thanks.
So just a few things that we're going to probably want to talk about. And number one is, it's been brought up, is our evidence tech and what that will look like moving forward as that moves into our budget full-time potentially here. So that would be a position that is currently filled by Bill, but it would be full-time, and a majority of that time obviously would be utilized in the evidence arena. And he would subsidize in the other areas that he's also currently working in, And part of that would be, assisting on some of the public safety code stuff still. So he'll be a utility tool, but again, focused in the evidence component. For the most part, we're going to be status quo in the budget. As far as line items go and projections, just from last year and moving forward, and some of the things that we're trying to do and accomplish. The one thing that you will see is the allocation for the, I think you see it, we show actually 27 FTEs for 18-19, and that one additional is going to be for the red flex or the speed on green. It's not going to actually be a fully vested employee. It's just going to be allocated monies so that we can diversify that money depending on what we need. It could be 1, 2, or 3 people that we'll bring, and typically that would look like what we've used in the past with retired officers coming in and being able to offset some of our need for patrol. It'll look similar to that with photo red light and speed on green. So we can't say with certainty how many we'll bring in, but depending on the numbers and the people we can get to commit to that, that's what that vision is for that money there. And otherwise, other than that, I don't think there are any real major changes that we have moving forward.
Captain, what is the acronym CAD?
That's our CAT. So that's, well, in plain terms, it's for our, it's computer-aided dispatch.
Oh, got it.
So that's what we're working with up at WACA, our dispatch system out of Hillsborough for Washington County.
And if I could also ask, the 6701 special projects, that is the $10,000 for the Justice Center, is that correct? And last year we funded that differently. This year it's coming out of the police, is that correct? Last year it didn't come out of the special one-time payment?
Yes.
But that's in the.
Which was also in
It was also in police.
Okay.
So that's
6701.
I'm sorry, I'm lost. What was the?
So it's just the support for Justice Center. I just wanted to see where that was.
Okay.
Because it's under a special project.
So there's a new facility that just opened in Washington County called the Family Justice Center that the request was made to all jurisdictions in Washington County for a 3-year commitment at $10,000 each. So in this current budget, we have a $10,000 contribution. In this proposed budget would be year 2. And if we can afford it next year, you'll see it next year as year 3.
So in 4229, the state revenue, other state revenue, what's that difference there? Or
Marijuana.
Marijuana.
Oh, duh. Okay.
That was our one-time, somewhat unexpected marijuana revenue.
Gotcha. Thank you.
We'll leave it at that.
Okay. Any other questions for Captain Paul?
I have a question on the Mark 43 program. In the presentation, the figures stated that it was going down approximately $1,000. But at one of the last pages of the contract, it shows $23,088 for a base year fee. Is that because of the startup date of January rather than July?
I'm not sure.
The $5,000 difference?
Is that what it is? So one of the things, it's a two-piece system, and originally we were going to just go with the strict RMS of that, and they also offer an evidence piece that we needed to update already. So it just marries well together because it's one system that we can link very easily with one another. So rather than going out and buying a separate evidence, updated evidence system, we elected to go with the component that's there with it.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Captain.
There's fresh coffee that Sylvia made. Anybody needs coffee?
So the last part of the general fund discussion tonight is Public Works. There's a lot more to the Public Works Department when we get to the enterprise funds, so you'll see Craig multiple times over the next few weeks. So.
And Craig, as you're doing your presentation, there are a lot of acronyms in Public Works. Can you translate those for everyone that's watching as well?
I will try.
Thank you.
I will try. We do get set on those.
Yeah.
I just want to start out with facilities. The actual facility rental is Sesame Donuts in this budget.
Page 74 in your books.
573. Couple things. Most of this budget is status quo besides one-time projects, and I'll point some of those out. You'll see in the 6198 it goes from 7975 to 72,000. About $70,000 is related to the senior center grant that was talked about earlier. You'll also see in printing and advertising an increase. I believe we have about $50 that's related to our stuff, and the rest of it is for the senior center grant, printing and advertising. You'll see dues to organization, $10,000. That is for the emergency management co-op IGA that the city pays in. It's coming out of this budget. Katie can answer any questions on that because that's where we're going. I think it has to do with allocation of time.
And is that largely because that used to be funded out of the police department, but with Captain Daniel leaving, we're going to shift primarily emergency management. We're transitioning to have that managed out of Public Works. Police will still be involved, obviously, but Captain Daniel had a strong expertise and interest in emergency management and was very passionate about it. And with his loss, we've decided to shift it over to Public Works.
And the facilities budget is a budget that is considered part of the overhead, so it's shared by the entire city, and emergency management benefits the entire city. So it's an appropriate use for overhead, as opposed to police services that are not allocated to the other departments of the city because they are mainly for the citizens and the safety of the citizens.
Practices, where to go? So you'll see also an increase in electricity, about 5% there, cover cost. You'll see our gas goes up about $10,000 for our facilities. That is because we didn't have really that cold of a winter this winter, so we need to be budgeting up in that dollar amount. You'll see in repair and maintenance of ground that has some of the one-time expenses in that, such as the YMCA's parking lot, the sealing of the outside of the building. That'll come out of repair and maintenance of grounds the next one. But you'll see there's some sidewalk repairs at the YMCA that needs to be done, as well as crack sealing and slurry and paved pathway back by the teen center needs to be completed, as well as seal coating the civic building parking lot out here that was not included in last year's budget on the one-time expenses. That's what you'll see coming out of, that's why that increased. And then your repair and maintenance of building, the 182, that has the other expenses of sealing the building at the YMCA, bricks, as well as replacing 2 urinals at the Public Works. They've probably been in there since the building was around or shortly after. They've never been changed out.
Do they still work?
Sometimes.
I'm just kidding.
It's true, though. We've had to make many repairs. There's a section at the teen center painting that we need to do on the front entrance that's up for that. And we've actually, there's some other projects related to our facilities in there. That's why that increased. You'll see on the one-time expenses. As we go down, you'll see a little bit of cost increase of the materials and supplies. We're now responsible for the plumbing materials inside the walls of the YMCA, so we boosted that up a little bit because there is leaks that happen there. That's in 6498. And then the next one is 7010, which is infrastructure, $5,500, or I guess it's 7020, $5,500. I'm going to bring my glasses up. It's put a door in outside of the home director's office so that actually this group of people on this side of the building has an escape route if something goes on. They can't go out the front door.
Oh, that's a good thing.
Yeah, where would that door connect to then?
It will come out in the court, in the court area.
So right now, essentially all the community development staff, if something terrible happened with an active shooter or something along those lines, basically a lot of folks are trapped.
Yeah.
And they could go into Julia's office, but there's not a way to get out of Julia's office. And so we're going to add, we've talked about this and in some of our scenario planning, and we want to add another egress basically for emergency management purposes to allow people to have an escape route.
Come out into the file room and then go out?
No, it'll come out to the court, and then people can come down toward my office. And actually about a year and a half ago, the architect for this building was here giving a tour. And this building's not that old, but we talked about that, and she said that's just a reality. She said instantly if she could do it again, knowing kind of today's world, she would have an access like that. But
Is this
just
her office, at Julie's office?
they didn't think about that back then. They do now.
Right.
Thank you.
And then you'll see 43,000 in improvements other than buildings. That's for the senior center, part of the grant. One other thing I didn't mention up above is the repair and maintenance and grounds. There's $25,000 of that is to repair asphalt in the back of the public works building that's falling apart. And as you'll see, FTE wise, we're pretty status quo with the building. Julie was talking about earlier, and Katie were talking about FTEs and allocation. We have a big old sheet that everybody comes out of different things too, different funds. So, but you'll see that stays status quo. Any questions on facilities? Moving on to parks, you'll see the revenue is the school district. That's half our cost through our IGA, and that's in 4234, as well as to do maintenance of all the fields. And then that also is revenue coming in from the school district for us maintaining the fronts of the properties. Rental is our reservations through our park shelters. We reserve the shelters all except Woodhaven Park. You'll notice the increases in salary, which everybody's talked about earlier. Most of this is the question about training. We have different certifications each year. Our budget pretty much stayed with the training in it, so we haven't added a lot. We did because we have to have monthly safety meetings, and sometimes we have to. It's required through OSHA that we do certain things. So not only certification-wise, that's where some of that money goes for that. Then on the line item 6312, repair and maintenance of buildings, you can see that is a variety of one-time projects that go into that fund as well. Our water costs are in here, and those projects, one-time cost for that goes under that is, I'm sorry, that's ground 172. It actually goes down from last year because they were one-time expenses also. Some of the one-time expenses, resurfacing the tennis courts that's on top of the reservoir, that'll be going on. Our overseeding, top dressing of all our sports field. So, you know, that's about $100,000 a year, but the school district pays half of that, so they get billed that. So where it shows that we're spending, we're also coming in the top part too from them. That's
Craig,
really...
Craig, I have a question.
Yeah.
So with all the school construction that's going on, and I think earlier we mentioned that some of the fields are going to be closed, and we're expecting less revenue in terms of the fees from all the sports associations. Did you factor that into the budget in terms of the maintenance we have to do?
The maintenance, yes. It's we're still going to have to do quite a bit of maintenance, even because the school is closed, and maybe Laurel Ridge sports field, one sports field's down, or whatever. We're still going to have to do all the other maintenance there, yes. So if we were inside their building, it would inside their buildings with their projects, that would be a little bit different.
Grass grows no matter what.
Operating supplies and materials, 6498. There's an increase there. And a lot of that's where our sign ballards and hardware, miscellaneous supplies, our damaged assets that we replaced, the field paint that we put down, planting of trees. We have about $4,000 this year that we need to replant, that we've either removed the tree, going through the process through the Parks Board that needs to be replanted. That's where the bark dust comes out of, all that kind of stuff. Fertilizer.
Craig, where in your budget are items like trail repairs and sidewalk, like the sidewalk program repairs that citizens can apply for? Where does all that fit?
Sidewalk repairs come out of the street operation fund when we talk next week about that.
Okay.
As far as the trail maintenance, it comes out of repair and maintenance of ground. And usually it's 5,000 to 20, depending on, it's not a lot.
Yeah.
But it just depends on when we do inspections in January. Okay. But your yard debris disposal, you'll notice in some of the budgets that it's went down in one area because we pay for all our yard debris now through Pride. They haul the stuff off. So there's about $17,000 a year just in yard debris comes out of our parks. So between grass clippings and everything else out of that, that's why you see an increase in 6498. And then the next one is really that comes up is the infrastructure 7010, and that is the playground at Pioneer Park, replacement of that, as well as adding ADA ramp, as well as a pathway that was never put in 2002, but now when you go in to do that kind of work, you actually have to add that, no different than what we've done in Stella Olson and Langer. There's also a concrete border there that half of it's done, the other half needs to be done. There is paving the lower half of the Granite Trail up at Snyder Park that's in here. This was in last year's budget. It was cut, we put it in this year's budget, so that all the runoff comes off of on the Sunset side and all just stays down. That's about $30,000 in there. And then replace wooden bench bleachers at the high school softball complex. There's 2 of them. There's about $8,200 in there to be able to change those over to metal. And that's all part of the asset plan, as well as I talked earlier about the tennis courts at Snyder Park resurfacing.
Can I ask a quick question about the resurfacing of the tennis courts? How often is that done?
5 to 7 years.
5 to 7 years.
And then this actually has tennis court lines going on as well as pickleball lines, since pickleball is using it also now, and they weren't when we built it.
Does everyone know what pickleball is?
We can invite Mike Johnson to come and he'll tell us all about pickleball. Let's not.
So, and as you'll see in the parks budget, the FTE count stays about the same too there, and that's just allocation. Seasonal is probably the someplace else versus in parks.
Where
Pioneer Park is
Yeah.
outside of 99? Okay.
And it needs updated.
the problem is with a lot of the park structures, you know, you can go out and try to revamp a slide for $10,000. That's what one of those slides will probably cost just on that structure. It's all the whole walkway. You can go out and try to, spend $40,000 if you can find the parts. That's what we run into a lot with our playground structures. That was probably put in. I didn't look at the plan before I came in up here, but tonight. But I bet you it's 2001, something like that.
And then on the wooden bleachers for the high school softball complex, I assume is that part of our RGA with them that we replace those?
We would probably split the cost with them because we run some of our softball programs. So when we replaced them, we'd send them the bill.
Okay.
Greg, do we ever look at grants for playground equipment, like through Kaboom or anything like that?
We have looked through, I forget the company's name when we did Murdoch. We looked at it and we put in one for that, but we didn't get it.
Okay.
So really, if this was to be approved, this playground, it probably wouldn't be till next spring till we actually did it.
It's a good suggestion to look at those, though. They're
Kaboom is the one that comes to mind.
So Craig, and with that park equipment replacement, is the process going to go through the Parks Board and thus that community so that if there's any tweaks to what is there with the same bucket of money, be it, yes, you still need a slide, or the configuration of what's there, if they want it to be a little bit different using the same amount of money, are we going through a little bit of a process just to ask the neighbors?
Yeah, so like we've done on similar parks, we would take it out for probably top two or three votes of a playground. We put a couple drawings together. We'd done a survey online before, and then we'd actually take it out to since that's a more neighborhood park versus if we were doing something, we go out to the neighborhood and have them give us their opinion on it, and then it would go through, bring those pictures back to the Parks Board, and the Parks Board would have the final say on that, like we've done in the past.
It's kind of what they did on Murdoch, right? As I recall.
Yeah, we've done it on both playgrounds, Stella Olson.
Stella, yep.
How much feedback do you actually get from something like that?
Well, it just kind of depends. When we did Stella Olson, we got quite a bit of feedback because we actually joined in on Music on the Green and got some feedback there. Murdoch, we got some, but not as much as we would like. But that's a neighborhood park too, so more than a bigger park like Stella Olson.
No Denver Bronco colors anymore.
Yeah,
I know.
nice colors.
I can tell you.
I'm not even a Bronco fan.
I can tell you that living close to this park that's going to be updated, I walk through it every day with 2 dogs, so 2 different dogs, and it is full of children, and it is full of children of all ages, all day long.
And yeah, and so they'll be very opinionated on what they'd like to see.
Correct.
I just think they appreciate having a park.
Hear, hear.
Is my point. You know,
Yeah.
our children in this community love their parks. So it's money well spent.
There's not enough north of the highway.
Right. Think about that too.
Greg, I do have a question about Pioneer Park. There's, it's really split at 50-50 between the developed area and then the undeveloped area where the tall trees are. And there's a certain amount of degradation that's gone on over the many, many years. Is there any plan to look at that part for rehabilitation or putting in a trail or something like that in the future for that part of the park?
We've talked internally in Public Works about some things you could do. Some of the comments of kind of a natural area and go in and clean it up, but it has not been budgeted or really talked to the Parks Board about it. Internally, I think we've had some conversations.
Yeah, but maybe something that the Parks and Rec Board can start talking about because it looks like it's getting.
Yeah, we've come in and removed some of the trees when we've had to, that kind of stuff, but yeah, I agree with you. Any other questions on parks?
I'm sorry, I do have one. The only question I have is, last budget season discussion time, one of the issues that came up was the possibility of making our current dog park a year-round park. What kind of expense might that be if we were to want to see that happen?
I believe that's in general construction.
That's in general construction, and that conversation would either be next week or the week after, depending on how far we get.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Save that question.
Save the question.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
The skate park is somewhere else too.
All right, so.
They talk about it on this page that goes with the park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See why we're confused?
Yeah.
I see why you're confused.
I get confused sometimes.
Moving on.
4398 in fleet and equipment. So this is a variety of, it's just not parks and facilities equipment. This is all of our equipment in the departments we're talking about that we're not talking about, and also what we're not talking about tonight. So your surplus of old equipment that we sell, that's the 4398 that we bring in about 67 is what we're expecting this 6770 this next year. That kind of just depends on what people are going. We go through an auction on that. As you'll see, salaries go down a little bit in here. Fuel and oil, that's a hard one to judge as the costs keep going up right now, but we have 97,000 in there for this next year. We're expecting it to be at 86 at the end of this year. You'll see repair and maintenance of equipment, it's went up. We have a sweeper that costs quite a bit of money that comes out of the storm to keep on the road, and it's getting older. But we're going to have to make some repairs there, as well as our big flush equipment. It's not brand new anymore, so that's some of the reasons. Our vehicles are getting a little older. More money goes into the vehicles. That's why you see the increase there. New vehicles, that is, we've got vehicles 2001s. We don't.
What is that number? It's like you said.
Where you at? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on 6315. Oh, sorry. The repair and maintenance. You'll see small increases. And then you'll see the other thing I'll point out is vehicles. There's a variety of vehicles in here that from different funds that are paying for certain things. There's 3 different police vehicles this year one's got about 100,000. It's a 2006. It's got about 100,000 miles on it right now. So think about in a police vehicle that it's not going to be here July 1. So these vehicles probably are going to be closer to next December by the time we get them ordered and get them here. So it's got about 100,000 on it. There's another one that we're replacing. It's about a 2011. It's got 92,000. And then we have one that's about a 2006. I believe we might have bought used. That it only has about 70,000 miles on it, but it's a lemon. And it just dies on you. And the dealerships haven't been able to figure out. It's not good to put the police officer.
Chief is nodding his head back
Yeah,
there.
I mean, so that's why you have 3 of them here this year. Otherwise, you would have 2. But it's been in the shop more than what it's been on the road, I'll bet, in the last year.
Wow.
So I can't speak for the chief. I'm hearing that from our fleet supervisor also. But when I look in our work order system, that's what some of the stuff I see. We have a 5-yard truck that is being split out in here. Dump truck that's being split from the utility funds. We currently have a 1998 dump truck, one of them 97, 98. And our other dump truck is a 99, so that'll be coming up. So over the years in the utility funds, we've been growing a reserve for the replacement of this. So that's what you'll see in that number, as well as we bought a used meter rig from a city down by San Francisco to do our meter reading. We're not reading meters anymore because of our AMI system, and that thing has got some problems with it, so we're asking to sell it and to replace it with a pickup that's more usable for our crews, as well as a 1994 Ford Ranger that's in here for about $25,000. The bigger expense on the equipment in here is about 4 years ago, I believe, 3 or 4 years ago, we purchased a used sweeper from Clean Water Services that probably got like about 90,000 miles on the thing. We purchased this to get into sweeping for about $35,000. We put money in here to purchase our own sweeper so we can get 12 years out of it now. So you have $150,000 just for a street sweeper. And if there is one on the market that's used that you could actually purchase and get quite a few years out of, we would be looking at that when it comes time to buy, like we've done our other dump trucks. You have a steam cleaner, and the need for the steam cleaner is equipment comes in out of the sewer that we need to clean up. The guys have to mess around with it. It has hot water, so that's what we're asking for, $6,000 for that, as well as a cargo trailer that we've been talking about for quite a few years to be able to put all our saws and stuff in that actually go out and make street cuts. You hook up to a trailer and you pull that out. Those are being paid for out of the utility funds.
So
that's really the fleet budget. As you can see, the FTE-wise stays about the same. It did go up a couple of years ago when we added a couple more hours, another 20 hours, 32 hours, went from 20 to 32 hours for the mechanic position in there. So, and then we have some smaller equipment repair, small equipment, weed eaters, that kind of stuff that comes out of small equipment or general equipment now, 6598, and that's paid for a variety of funds.
Greg, what's a retroflectometer?
That's in the street fund.
What is it?
It is actually a machine that you actually, when we do our sign maintenance, you actually put up the prismatic, the illumination of the sign. It'll tell you if it's a good sign or bad sign. So if you ever get into a court case, somebody runs a stop sign, you can say this is what it looks like. When we checked it last December, this was the reflectivity of the sign, besides just our eyes doing it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. They have little. I saw that immediately. I was like, I don't know what that is, and because those signs are designed to reflect the light directly back, so that when you're driving on the road, it doesn't just it goes right back to the driver, so the driver sees that sign, and over time they lose that ability through whatever vandalism and sunlight, and so at some point it's not as reflective, and when it reaches a certain point, then we have a risk. So it was fascinating what I learned about on the web. The only word in the whole budget, I did not know what that was. So
I should have looked it up.
Oh my God.
Greg, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
I do remember when we allocated funds 3 years ago to purchase a street sweeper from Clean Water. How much was that?
Paid $35,000 for it.
And it was 9 years old?
It was 2006.
Mayor Mays had a question, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
It's on the similar, it's quite all right. I didn't raise my hand. I just turned my mic on and somebody noticed.
Caught it, so.
If you could do me a favor and dig up the old report that you probably draft at the time to justify why we brought that in-house sweeping?
Sure.
Just so that I can support the idea of continuing to do that or not?
Yep, no problem.
Yeah, I believe we were getting close to $120,000 a year in street sweeping costs.
Yeah, so I just like to be educated.
Yep.
Thanks.
And
Go ahead.
before we move on from fleet, I just want to point out for those of you who like to look at the numbers very closely, that we've changed the accounting for fleet. And so you will see some transitions in here. I don't know if you remember, we had an audit issue with the way that fleet was being funded with transfers in. And so we made a commitment to change that. We did a first part of the transfer, and then throughout this year, we've been working to fine tune. We're still fine tuning, as emails that were sent back and forth today would let you know. So I'm still trying to find how every piece is accounted for within fleet so that we make sure that we're allocating correctly to each of the individual departments. And we have a process now where each quarter we get all of the work orders that have come in, and so we allocate the specific labor costs and parts to the individual department that owns the equipment and the purchase of the equipment. So all of these purchases that you're seeing, even though the expense shows in the general fund, there's an equivalent, and you see the equivalent in line 6803. So I just want to show you where that money's coming back into the general fund. It comes in as a negative expense, and that's a reimbursement that comes into the general fund for exactly the cost of the equipment. So when it's purchased, it's the exact cost of the equipment. When it's maintenance, it of course has an overhead because there's a shop overhead on top of it, and that's recalculated every quarter. So it's readjusted on a quarterly basis to real time. So we don't have a look back period or anything, but we do adjust on a quarterly basis. So if there are any questions about how we recover anything, that's.
And I just wanted to say, it just reminded me when I was looking at all the departmental requests, this jumped out because it's a larger number than in the past. I'm like, can't we save any money here? But the reality is, when I learned about police cars, as you described, and the age of some of this equipment, I mean, it's time to replace this. So, and I think we have a whole schedule, and for the newer members of council, I think maybe providing actually for the whole committee, like the next 5 years in terms of fleet, because there's a whole schedule in terms of what we're going to be spending. And they're big dollars.
And so one of the things, if you look on your one-time revenues, this is something I've never provided before. If you look, you see the figure at the bottom of the one-time revenues where it's determining how much is available for one-time funding. There's a line that says less reserved amounts. Those amounts are what we have been setting aside for police cars and for trucks for parks and things like that. It's never been called out before, and I feel like if we're saying there's money being set aside and we have this plan to set money aside, then we need to actually set it aside. So this is as close as I can get using past models because no one has previously set it aside. There was a perception that it was. My hope is to set up the accounting for it so that it actually has its own account in the GL. It does not yet. Right now it's just on spreadsheets, but at least it's called out here. And so when we say we have the money for the 3 police cars, if you look at the schedule for the 20 years and how much we've set aside, and that's all figured into the percent calculations and in the 5-year model, all of those purchases and all of the facility repairs and all of that have also been put into the model according to these schedules, which has never been done before, to try to make them very accurate. So that's what that less reserved amounts represents, is the amounts we've been setting aside for general fund vehicles.
Any more questions for Craig at this point? Great. Thank you, Craig. So before we get into the 5-year forecast, Katie, is this a good time to do just a quick synopsis of the compensation study? Or what is your recommendation?
I think it would probably be a good idea to get the budget committee up to the same state that the council is at, so that we all are on the same page going into this 5-year forecast and where we're at. So there was a compensation study that was started. The process was decided to be gone through about 2 years ago. So it's taken a while to go through. It was completed earlier this year. And then we've had several union contracts. The SPOA contract was negotiated prior to the compensation study being put out. The data from the study, so we had some of the data. We had an idea of what it was going to show, but we didn't have the final information. But that was used as part of the negotiations for SPOA. ASHME just was approved a few weeks ago, and the ASHME contract actually follows the recommended, with some very minor changes, but follows the recommended salary schedule recommended by the consultant. And then the other piece that's left is the management. So this schedule, what she did is she took a lot of comparable cities in the area, both smaller cities and larger cities. There were a number of criteria. The report is on the website if you want to look at the details. With the goal, with a few main goals. One main goal is to see, is our staff at a level that's comparable to market in pay, and another one is to eliminate or avoid compression. We were starting to have issues with union members getting paid too close to what management's getting paid, and so you end up with overlap with supervisors making less or the same as the people they're supervising, which can cause issues. So the goal was to review all of that and determine a new salary schedule that would put the individuals in the city at par with market to be more competitive and to be able to retain our staff and to make sure that we eliminated that compression that we were starting to see in order to make sure that people could move between the different grades and that supervisors were not making less than the people they were supervising. So those were the main intentions of the study. The study did come back showing that the city was lower than market overall. The decision from council was to aim for a 50%, so a basic on par with market. And so that's the salary schedule that was reached as a final decision was on par with market. Then the decision is, how do you implement that and where do you put people on the schedule? The recommendation was to at least get people onto the schedule. So take how much they're getting paid and put them at the closest step on the schedule without them going down, with the goal to actually put them at market. So what does at market mean? At market means that when someone has been with the city for 5 years or more, they should be making an average income at market rate. And so the goal was made to have the people who have been with the city for 5 years or more put on step 6 of this 13-step schedule, because 6 was market. Anyone who had been here less than 3 years gets put at step 1 or the closest step, because you haven't earned that market step. And so this budget proposes to implement that compensation study with the understanding that people who have been here 5 years or more, or who have been in a position 5 years or more. For example, if someone went from a union position to an exempt position within the last 6 months, they wouldn't be eligible for the full raise to market. So there are a few conditions like that. But and then with anyone less than 5 years to be introduced at the closest step to what they are currently making. So that's what's included in this. Yes.
The pages.
The salary schedules are included on page 100 and 101. We have a small change to that we will be proposing. As I was preparing for this meeting, I was looking at other cities and doing my own comparisons for the different positions, make sure that everything looks reasonable. And it looked reasonable most of the way up until I got to the senior executive team. And then some of the things looked a little out of place, looked a little too high for what was being proposed for senior management. Spoke with the city manager and assistant city manager. We spoke with the senior leadership team, contacted the consultant, got an explanation as to what had happened. And then I proposed a slightly lower schedule that still met all the criteria she was suggesting, but that put us more comparable to cities instead of being quite so far out of whack. So it lowered somewhat the director's salaries. And that has to do with this 2,000 in step that doesn't have anyone in it. So there were 8% between steps. And so with no one in that step and then another 8% to the next step, it really should have been somewhere in between those two steps that the director should be. So there will be a new proposed salary schedule so that those directors are lower, and then the ACM and the fire and the police chief are slightly lower as well. So those are adjustments that you do not see yet in your budget, but that we do recommend.
That helps.
Jean, can we get the 5-year projections?
Katie, can I ask a quick question about that? Yeah. When you're looking at the compensation study, are you also factoring in what they're projecting with PERS? Because PERS is a big piece of compensation.
PERS is a big piece of compensation. Tom, can you speak to the comparable cities?
Sure. Yeah, so it's a good question, and what we wanted to make sure is, as we were doing the compensation study, that we also looked not only at the salaries but also at total compensation. So she couldn't do it for all of the cities that she used for the compensation main study itself, but she picked cities of similar size in our market area. I think there were 7 or 8 that she used, and she took a look at insurance benefits, she took a look at retirement benefits, she took a look at VIVA, she took a look at those bigger dollar items that would make up total compensation. And honestly, she kind of dropped it because we were within 1% or 2% of everybody else when she started looking at everything. I think the PERS was right around 1.2%. Our retirement benefit was different, and that's because everybody essentially has the same program as mandated by the state, and you can't really, there's not much flexibility there. So she did look at it, and her recommendation was to not factor that in because we were so close to where the market was telling us we were at in total compensation.
So can I ask a question also? So the range that we're talking about, like if you look on page 100, after the none column that you were talking about, Katie?
Yes.
The IT director, the community development director, the finance director, the public works director, and the community services director, they all have equivalent salaries?
I'll let Joe speak to that.
Yes. So early in the consultant's report, the IT director and the community services director were isolated outside of the others. And I talked with the consultant because I felt that both of those were comparable positions to everyone else, and we had a discussion about this. So the IT director, so he, in this case Brad, has the IT function, but he also manages Sherwood Broadband. Most IT directors don't manage a broadband utility. So I made the recommendation, and the consultant was supportive of it, to move that position into the same, what is that called, Tom? The 2100. And then the same with the community services director in terms of FTE counts, the number of programs, the budget responsibility. I didn't see a major difference between those two department directors and the others. So that was my recommendation, to lump them together. She was supportive of that. She said, sure, that's your discretion as the city manager. You know your departments better than I do. So that was my decision to lump them together rather than keeping them separate.
And with this compensation study, I mean, one of the biggest problems that we see on the horizon is the PERS component.
Yes.
And we're at status quo for this next year because we're in the second year of the biennium. And we're not putting anything extra away for PERS. And yet, some of these are very significant pay raises.
Correct.
I mean, I was just calculating like and I'm not going to say names or anything, I'm just saying the position.
Correct.
So the community development director, just calculating off of what was presented in the budget, you're talking about a $20,000 a year increase based on the compensation study. Am I reading that wrong?
It was, I believe it was closer.
And that's just on the salary part. I'm not talking about the added benefits. I'm just saying from, like, it was at 113 and then it was proposed like 133 or whatever. But
Susan,
what I'm saying is that we do have long-term employees, totally get it. We do have, I mean, this is just one study. And if we're making huge increases, and I'm not saying our staff doesn't do Herculean jobs, because they do, but what I'm saying is that with one of our greatest liabilities and greatest problems that we have on the horizon, building up these huge increases based on one consultant's recommendation, looking at other cities and just looking position to position, where there's also a difference between education, you know, I mean, it's just a whole combination of things where you have to make sure that you're actually comparing apples to apples. You know, one community development director in one.
I'm going to jump in here. So the study was very comprehensive. It involved very extensive questionnaires, and it was done on a point system. There were a variety of people that came out. We all went through interviews, and then the different people from the different agencies. So this was not just a pay study. We went through job descriptions, we went through education needed. This was very comprehensive. So, I mean, I did just a very brief recap in the interest of time, but this compensation study was very well done. It took a long time, but it really was very well done. I'm very confident in the results of the compensation study, that they indicate the market, and not just because of what people are getting paid, but I look at positions. I've looked at the League of Oregon Cities, for example, and not just the report that came out, but I have the raw data of it and have looked across the board and done a lot of my own comparisons. And with the exception of that 2 different steps for the directors, I found it to be very, very accurate. And she really did. I spoke with the consultant on several occasions, and she did a lot of extra work behind the scenes that we haven't seen. And I encourage this conversation because I do understand that this does cause a problem. And you'll see behind me, and you'll see on the papers you have in front of you the 5-year forecast. And it is dismal. I mean, we recognize that it's dismal, and it is dismal because we've increased salaries.
Correct.
And staff is recognizing that. And we understand that it does, but in the same token, we know that the staff has been now presented with what the market's making. They're looking around. They're starting to reach out to other places and look other places. And we need to retain good people, and we need to recruit good people. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is to implement a salary schedule. And now that SPOA has the union contract adopted and ASHME has the union contract adopted, if we were to go back and not implement for exempt, that compression issue we were talking about would be amplified to a level that we would now have so much compression that our managers would now be making less than the people that they manage.
So I want to piggyback on that because she handled that very well. But I want to remind folks, we have not done a compensation study in almost a decade. So we always talk about recruiting and retaining good people. And part of recruiting and retaining good people is paying them market. We're growing as a city. We're not a small city of 5,000 people or 10,000 anymore. We used to be a training ground. People stayed here. A lot of the folks have stayed here for 10, 15 years, knowing they were underpaid. And you can argue they could have gone elsewhere, but they stayed here. And when we started this process, I knew this conversation would take place. If you're going to go out and find out whether you're competitive in the marketplace and ask that question, and then find out that you're not, and not make adjustments, you're going to lose great people. And I am telling you, if we don't do this now, we will lose great people. And I'm not, as the city manager, going to be someone that's going to be, when I know that scenario could take place, going to lose good people that have been here for 10, 15, 20 years and who want to stay here. So that's why we're doing this. It is a big cost. I think we're going to probably talk about this 5-year forecast and doing some other things, but I fully support implementing this. I think it's critical to retaining great staff.
Can I add something?
Sure.
So just from my lens, having worked with hundreds of cities across the country in my career, we do have some excellent directors here. I mean, it's rare that I would run into a city that has the quality of people that we do across all the different departments. And, you know, you couple that with, we're pretty much theoretically at full employment right now across the country. So it's pretty competitive out there. So if we're not taking care of the folks that we have, it is a high risk that we lose them. I do agree with your concern about how do we bend this curve, you know, and I think that's a conversation we need to have. And I think there's some ways we can do that, but we can't have this drop negative or drop below 10% or even 20% if we can pull it off.
Correct.
Well, and my, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify, since you said we hadn't done a compensation study in over a decade, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we have some directors, besides cost of living, have not had raises in 6, 7, 8 years, 5 years.
Correct.
Well, we've had COLAs. We've had
I said
raises.
besides cost of living, so they haven't had any merit increases, they haven't had any.
They've had step increases unless they're.
Oh, they were topped out.
Topped
out for 8 years with
well,
nothing.
and so, go ahead, Kim, I don't
No, I'm
know.
done.
Okay, so my whole point is that everybody, in the most perfect world that we have, everybody should be paid at market. And I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that we have a lot of huge challenges, and this is just not my opinion. Go look at, go talk to the man on the street. In the private sector, everybody's struggling. So my point is that the livability in Sherwood is based on a lot of assumptions. If we go through great increases, which we're doing for our staff, what other things are those going to change? Is that going to mean that we strive to get higher density because then we bring more fees in the development? Are there things that we then have to do, like Tim's saying, what do we do to make adjustments to make up for these extra increases? Is it going to have an impact on the town in the way that people view the town?
And I think with that
why
in
they
mind-
moved to the town. And so what I'm saying is that this is an ongoing problem. If up front we make these changes, we can never stop trying to cover those changes, because it's not just these extra changes that we have right now, it's the increase that we have in the responsibility and the liabilities going forward. And we can't just pretend that that money is going to come from somewhere else,
Well,
because it's
Susan, with all that in mind, I think it's important that we delve into these 5-year projections. and keep that. I think that conversation's,
This is
going to
one
be part
piece
that
of it.
conversation.
Yeah, there's more to come.
Yeah, Amy, go ahead.
You know, overall with this compensation study and all of them, I know that they're broken out per department, but overall, how much are we talking about increase in salaries?
Well, not increasing salaries, but increases overall is approximately $450,000, not taking into account SPOA.
Is that the whole, including all of the benefits, or are you just talking
Correct.
about the salaries?
With the benefits, that's the increase.
So let's shift gears and delve into the 5-year projections.
So we've, as you can see, well, first of all, you have the red line, which is what's in your book, and then you have the blue line, which, as we've talked about, there are a few things that we've found. You put a budget together in January, projections, and then by the time you get to May, some things have changed. So I do want to go through real quick what things have changed. So the first is the executive team salaries that I talked about, some differences there. I want to point out we did have to make an adjustment for hiring a senior IT analyst. We had several candidates. We had to bump up the proposed pay to very close to market because we could not get someone to take the job at the entry level on the new scale. That's how far off we were, that we couldn't even get a person to fill our IT position with the job that I had in the budget. I had to bump the budget up just to get someone in the door so that we had an IT person. And that to me was very telling. So that's an adjustment that was made after the budget was put together. We had our HR person leave. She did not have benefits through us, so her spouse must have had them or something. So I needed to add those back in. Those are things that happen when an employee leaves, you know. So we don't know yet who will have or how HR will be managed, but they're going to need benefits. So I did have to put those back in. So these are the types of things that happen after the fact, and you really, when we're doing this minute of detail and we're doing this focused of a forecast, 24,000 in salaries affects in the forecast the PERS, and it affects in the forecast the salaries in the future. 16,000 is going to be increased at a different rate than the 24,000 will be. So they go into different categories in the forecast. The 10,000 in one area doesn't equate to the same amount of money as 10,000 in another area. So we're trying to be very specific on how we adjust these numbers. And then we had engineering project inspection fees that Julia had talked about. There were 4 projects that we were still on the fence. Were they going to happen? Were they not going to happen? Ended up being about $40,000. So in the final version, they're there, so they will need to be added in for revenue. The bug, which is this fiber something in IT land that
Broadband user group.
Okay, the broadband user group.
It's important because it's an acronym that
Yeah.
you like to know what
I had
acronyms
no idea
mean,
what it was.
and now you know as well.
Now I know as well, the broadband
A
user
bunch
group.
of IT people came up with that name.
Yes.
So it was spread over several years, the cost of joining the broadband user group. And it continued in the budget and didn't need to continue in the budget because apparently now it's all paid. So that I could take out of the budget. And then the land sold to the school district, like I said, they ended up needing a few more acres. So that is in there. And the last increase is purely something on the part of finance. We put in there the number for January through December instead of January through June. I don't know why. So that's an increase in 33,000. So those are what has been included in here. And I wanted to put these in to give you an idea of what's our starting point for our discussion. The blue curve is really where we're starting. So what I'm hearing is a very large concern that this curve is too steep and that we can't do it. I'm also hearing that there is support for the compensation study, especially since it's been implemented for the 2 unions. And so the question before you now is, what do you want to do about it? So
for, if I could, I think I probably joined the conversation about the last of anyone from the current stuff. And I expressed when we first saw this curve, you know, I've sort of seen it before, and we can manage it, and I fully believe we can do that again as a committee, as a council, as a city. I've since gotten to better understand and appreciate the detail of the model that you've put together, Katie, which I appreciate. That this is certainly more detailed than we've done in a decade ago when I was dealing with it with others. So I appreciate that level of detail so that there's more certainty, both from the expense side and upcoming estimated PERS increases, as well as estimated increases in revenue from projects that are in the pipeline that are actually going to happen versus potentially happening. With that said, I'm also a big proponent of being proactive when we recognize problems and not wanting the line to dip below 20% is my intent. And also, as a caveat, I am not a fan of cutting things that will harm the community long term, like sealing a parking lot because we don't want to spend the $20,000 this year and it causes a much larger expense down the road, or replacing a vehicle that needs to be replaced. So with those prefaces, I would be very interested in seeing from Joe and Katie a proposal next week to reduce overhead and what that would, the impact that could be to operations of between $400,000 and $500,000 a year. Because if we do that over 5 years, that will make, in theory, a ending fund balance in 22-23 of between $3 and $5 million. And so that's what I'd like to see what you would do if that was the urging of this group to do of that number. Because I believe if we don't do that this year, then to react next year, it would be more like $600,000 to $700,000. Right.
So your request or your suggestion is to
get a recommendation from staff on what a $400,000 to $500,000 reduction in labor would look like.
So with a $400,000 to $500,000 decrease, how would that impact services?
And that's the question. It's part of the mix.
Would you be open to several different levels, like presenting several different levels? What would it look like at 300, at 400, at 500, for example, and what types of services would be impacted? Or are we looking at just one straight package at different levels?
For me, for my support, I want to see at least 4. So in one sense, if we were to delay and we were to turn around in a year, say we need $600,000 to $700,000 in cuts, what does $600,000 to $700,000 look like? That's really, really scary stuff, probably. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
I would like to, because it sounds like the majority of this room or this group is going to ask for cuts. So I would like to see different levels, maybe 200, 250.
So would it, I'm just trying to gauge the room, because we have 14 people and I've heard from a few, so I'm trying to get a few more. So if I came with what the forecast would look like with the specific scenarios, but I think that would probably be more helpful than just a dollar amount on a cut.
Correct.
Is what does the line look like with them?
Right.
I'm hearing as low down as 200. I'm hearing no lower than 400. Do I have a 300? Do I have a 325? Going once, going once.
Well, I think part of what will happen is when you guys get together, there's going to be some logical cuts, and whether they hit exactly each $100,000 or whatever, some of it will be logical. I mean, if you do this, it's going to have this kind of $150,000 impact. So I'm for a range, and a sensible range based on your managerial and.
I would agree. It's always good to see the options, and what the different ranges are. I would say though that if we're not going to look, I mean, if we don't look at 400 to 500 and we're going to look at a lower number, then we have to ask ourselves, okay, how are we going to backfill that with additional revenue? That has to be part of it too, because if we don't do something now, we're committing ourselves to potentially a levy or something like that.
So you're looking for an offset of that 400, so how do you do it, either 400 and 0 or 200 to?
Yeah, and so those, the 5-year projection, does that include Tonkin employment area being developed? I mean, what?
Yes, so that.
To some degree. I mean, again, you have to remember, going back to the mayor's statement, this model is much more sophisticated than we've ever had. However, it's still a crystal ball. And as you get out to years 4 and 5, it's really can move significantly.
Or just even in a 1 year, we can see, I think a couple of directors have said, well, it wasn't really, the expense wasn't really 40,000, it came in at 30, or it wasn't really 50, it came in 35 or whatever. So there's a lot, I don't know if that's a $200,000 wishy room, $100,000, wish-wash. I don't really know, but it is interesting to note that there have been several directors that have presented that, they were conservative the year before. So I would like to see
the challenge is different than in the previous years. The challenge here is to cut ongoing expenses. This is not an exercise of, well, if we just defer this or not spend this one-time expense, it's a different challenge. So in dollar amounts, 250 to 500, it's going to mean staff cuts, because that's where we have to make the changes.
In some interesting context, a lot of cities, I think Portland's one of them, if I remember right, Joe, that it's actually a budgeting policy that your budget, you have to show that you're going to stay above your limits, like 20% in our case, over the next 5 years, and that's.
Or start making cuts in that first year.
That's right.
And that may be actually a policy I've talked to Katie that we want to talk about as a committee implementing. And what I've heard in conversations previous to tonight and tonight is if we don't start now, it's just going to be much more difficult and potentially much more painful.
That's the question I was going to ask. So obviously we're not the only city that's in the predicament that we're in. And although we're probably better off than most with the reserves that we have, what are other cities doing to counteract the decline?
It varies. I think if you look at cities like Wilsonville and Tualatin who have better fund balance, they have the same charts, but they're not dipping below their 28% or 10% because they're healthier.
And their staff has probably played at market.
Potentially. I mean, we're making, to your point, Susan, we're making a big increase in salary, and that's causing this to go down. It's not the sole reason. There's PERS and other kind of things. If we trim back, I don't know if it's 250 or 300 the bottom, 400 and 500, and come back and say, this is what, if you want 250,000 in cuts, here's what I am recommending, and this is what it does to the curve. Here's 400,000, and here's what it does to the curve, and this is the impact. And here's 500,000, and this is what it does to the curve, but here's the impact. Now, we haven't done the analysis, but 500,000 is going to start to cut into services. And that's a choice. I mean, I think you need choices. It's a, okay, do we need to do that all now? So if you do something that's more in the 300,000 to 400,000 range, the cutting probably doesn't end. It's just beginning as we kind of manage this.
So perhaps for the sake of having some data to look at, giving you the opportunity to maybe come up with 3 scenarios, a 250, 350, 450, so that we're meeting in between what I've heard folks talking about.
Yeah, somewhere like in that range.
Those are your targets.
Yeah.
We have a point to start
Correct.
engaging in a more in-depth conversation. Is that a reasonable
Yes.
request in advance of our next meeting?
Yes.
Yeah.
So as I see that looking, it would be two things. We would see this graph and what those would look like at those three proposals, and then we would have to see the
impact.
details
The
behind
impact.
those
Yep.
numbers, what that actually
Correct.
truly means in the real world.
Correct.
Okay. Yep. Just making sure that I'm seeing.
Because
what
it's
you're
kind
saying.
of two different, it's a cost-cutting exercise to kind of move that curve, but what's the impact of those?
One of the things that I think most of us that were on the committee last budget season really appreciated was the model that you threw up on the projector where you could change the number and we could go, oh, well, we can't do that. Bad idea. That was really helpful. And
I don't have that specific model because
and I'm not looking
the
for
current
that,
model
yeah.
is so much more refined.
Right,
But
right.
if we have different scenarios,
Right.
I can come with the different scenarios
Yeah,
with
that
this
would be
new model.
very helpful.
And we can definitely do that.
And the goal, before we go to anything else, is really to wrap up the general fund and reach some kind of consensus of which one this committee thinks is the right option.
Yeah.
Because then we can move forward to the other funds and the other parts of the budget.
America?
Yes.
Can I suggest to the committee, if you haven't already read it, that the New York Times ran an article April 14th, 2018 about PERS and the effect that it has on cities on their long-range planning. And I truly think it's worth everybody's time. 'Cause, again, they talk about what happens if you don't do it.
When do we start to see the URA offset come back into the general fund? When's that?
So it's in year 5 of the forecast. That's where you see the lines start to go up just a little bit. But it's
How much?
it's about 800,000 is what we're estimating, but 800,000 in year 5 is very different than 800,000 in year 1.
So I'm thinking out loud, I probably have something in the 250, 350, 450 kind of option.
Wherever they fit in with the reduction.
Small, medium, and large.
Yeah.
There's a 550 just to know.
No, I'm with Keith.
No.
Keith, I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm with Keith
You know,
also.
the hard part of being on the budget committee, where it's a combination of electeds and people from the town, is that there's only so many people on the committee, and there's a lot of residents out there, and that makes a lot of sense. Just, we gotta gut it out.
Gotta know the different realities.
So I know we're talking a lot about cuts as well, but to Tim's point as well,
There's a revenue
are there
thing
some
you're
missing revenues
Missing
that
revenue.
that we're
Absolutely.
thinking? I don't know.
Sale of properties.
You can't
Well, that's
make
where I was
money,
going with
but
the top
yeah.
employment areas, like what can we expect? You can't get a crystal ball out there and look.
Again, I think wherever you land, you're going to move that line up so you're more comfortable. But it's just the beginning of a conversation for the next 3 or 4 years. Because things will change. Some revenues will come in higher and like, oh, that's great. Some will come in lower. Property will develop faster.
Right.
Property won't develop.
Got the data that we have.
Well, we know that PERS is going to take a big jump in 2 years.
Some people say we're gonna have a recession, in 2 years.
Yeah.
But we don't know that, and it's in good or bad times.
Yeah, I would like to make a comment since I haven't talked about this yet. So I talked to Joe about this earlier today, and one of the things that I thought about tonight was, and I thought the directors did a great job. I think they're amazing people and they do a fantastic job. But I wonder if because I heard status quo, status quo, status quo, status quo all night long. And what I was concerned about is this really a status quo moment? If the directors had seen that curve when they were planning their budget, would it still have been a status quo? Would they have pulled back on some of those expenses? Would they have rethought about, I know Joe said, let's put that training and stuff back in there. I get that. You take stuff away, you want to put it back in. But I feel like the big picture is from this point forward that the city has to start minding every dollar, because it all adds up, and maybe rethink what does get sold. Josh spent $1,000 out of that fund. If we don't use that, then it's there for next year. Not that we need to not get a safe police vehicle, not that we not need to fix our street sweeper, but I would like to hear less of, this is a status quo budget. I mean, I think that's what they do, and they do it really well. I don't have any complaints about that, but I think we're talking about, we see the curve, and we haven't said, this is maybe not a status quo moment. From this point forward, we need to really tighten our belts. It needs to be a little tighter than, and I think they do a great job of managing, but I think that'd be a great philosophy, like that budget policy that Tim talked about, the city of Portland. Maybe not something like that, but just something that says we're going to really, really mind every dollar, and if we don't have to spend it, we're not going to spend it.
Very respectfully, that very notion has come up in every budget cycle that I've been a part of. And even before I applied for and joined the budget committee, that was one of the things that I brought before council as well. But what I've come to learn in participating in all of these budget sessions is that our staff works remarkably hard with a very finite and very frugal budget already. And they do, as Susan said, a Herculean amount of work with really minimal resources. So I think that it's important to recognize that while status quo may imply in some respects that we're just kind of going to keep on plugging along the way we have been, I think one of the messages that we need to hear as a committee and as council is that status quo for the city of Sherwood for many years has meant working within a really frugal budget already. And that staff has been working really hard with the resources that they have available. And I just wanted to say that because I think staff needs to be very well recognized for all of the work that they are doing with very few increases over the last several years.
Well, I certainly recognize that, and I didn't mean to offend anybody, but I think there's a culture. What is our culture? Are we, I think we're doing a great job, but you can't ignore what was on the screen.
Absolutely not.
So
I agree.
is everybody doing everything they can in every position they're in to help with that situation? And if so, awesome. Yeah. And if not, we need to tighten the belt. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think if staff feels like they're rewarded, they're appreciated, they can perform and do even more, inspire each other. Yeah, and your point is well founded. It's always been that case, and will be. That's just the nature of government. The positive I see is, depending upon positions that are cut, undoubtedly will be I believe the recommendation that we are at near employment. And so the folks that need to find a different job, there's lots of jobs available, I think. So from my chair, I feel a whole lot better this go around in my public service life of saying we need to make some adjustments to budget and FTEs, whereas when I did this in 06, 07, 08, and 09, and the unemployment rate was ridiculous and people couldn't get jobs. So.
Katie, did you want to interject?
Yes, please. So just a comment to add to what you said. The staff in the city is working leaner than they probably already should. And the problem is that we're reaching a point of disutility, and we're reaching a point where working leaner is not less expensive. And this is something that when I came in here, I've had to work with the departments to help them understand that just because you don't spend more money doesn't mean that you're saving money. We have an issue of efficiency that's starting to show up because people don't want to spend money, because people don't want to spend that $1,000 or people don't want to spend that $50. And we're reaching the point, and I've seen it in other cities before, where we aren't spending the money we need to do to create an efficient, well-running machine. The cost that a city has is people. The benefit you get from people is the work that they can get done and the efficiency. So I agree that we need to save costs. We need to save money, but we don't need to save on the little things. We need to teach our people how to be efficient, and we need to run processes to make sure that everyone's time is being used in the most efficient way possible, possibly across departments, things like that. That's the piece that staff and management can work on, is the efficiency of the staff. And the piece that the budget committee and that council can work on is, do we need all of these programs, or are we asking our people to do more with less? Because we're not increasing budgets for inflation. So we get less pens, we get less paper, we get less everything, because everyone is doing, we're not doing more with less. Your budgets are status quo. Yes, but everything costs so much more. So we really are doing more with less. So the question is, what less should we be doing so that the less that we're doing is the best thing we can be doing, so that we're doing, what we're doing is great instead of doing a lot of halfway stuff. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I think that that's a very, very valid point. I think the lens that we have as a budget committee should include the programming issues that you discuss, and how can we as a committee support staff to do the best that they can with the programming that we all agree is important and vital to the city.
Anything else for the good of the order? I think
We have to do the public hearing
Yes.
because it was
Yep.
noticed.
On this issue, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Unless there's any further comments, I'd propose that we close the regular meeting.
We need to do the public hearing because it was noticed. It will literally
Oh,
take
I thought
30
I had
seconds.
to close the first meeting and then open a new
No.
one.
No, you don't
Okay,
have to.
okay. My bad. So now I will open the public hearing on the use of state revenue sharing. Katie.
Okay, and I will first give a brief background in the interest of time. This will be presented again at the public hearing for the, that we'll do in front of council. Just want to give you a quick heads up. This document, I will email it. I've had a few requests. It's the full state shared revenue report with estimates. So I'll send it out to all of you. That has the detail, and it has all the graphs and where things are at and all of that. But from that, it gives you the per capita state shared revenues. Our certified population is 19,350. So to get how much you're expected to receive, you take the population, you multiply it by those amounts. It tells you how much revenue you can expect. This graph shows you in the general fund, the piece of the pie that's pulled out is the intergovernmental revenue. And I know I'm moving fast, but, and then the yellow parts are the parts that are considered state shared revenues. So this public hearing is required by law to give the public a chance to discuss the uses of state shared revenues. In order to continue to receive those from the state, we must present those. There are also state shared revenues in streets, and streets is almost entirely, I mean, it's quite a bit, 69% is intergovernmental from that is all state shared revenue, and that's from the vehicle taxes. That has gone up this year through the transportation plan that passed, which, by the way, as you start looking at streets, you'll find that there is an error in there. So I'm just telling you straight up, we missed the current year spring projects in the projections. So it's just, for next year's budget, it's just your beginning balance that's off. Craig is working on getting the bids. They should come in today or tomorrow. And so then we'll have amounts to put in there. And so we'll true that up before we get to streets. But I just didn't want a bunch of emails about why does streets not have any activity? So that's why. So how do we use state shared revenues? Currently in the general fund, it's combined with other non-restricted funds, and we don't designate it. We use it to support public safety, administration, community services, facilities, and community development. If we had to earmark it, it could go to support public safety, because our property taxes don't support public safety. We have to have other source of revenue. So if we were required to earmark it, it would very easily be earmarked for public safety. But we're not required to earmark it. Street operations, it can only be used for expenses related to streets. We've got paving, streetscapes, street trees, et cetera. When we did the last study for street fees, they recommended a large increase in street fees to cover costs. We said we have this state shared revenue, and we had them redo with their recommended fees to include these to offset the amount that we're billing the customers. And that's how we were able to keep the street fees where they are and to have enough to support the ongoing maintenance of our streets. So with that, we will have a public hearing. I know there's no one here. I have to go through the verbiage.
Anybody could talk, staff could talk.
Staff could talk, yes. The purpose of this hearing is to provide the public with an opportunity to submit testimony concerning the possible uses of state revenue sharing funds for fiscal year 2018-2019. The order of business we will follow in conducting this hearing will be receive public testimony, questions from the committee. The hearing will then be closed and no further testimony will be received, then discussion by the committee. Any interested person may present testimony. If you wish to speak, any of you, please fill out one of the testimony forms and submit them to Jean, sitting up here. The committee chair will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through the committee chair. That is Mirta. When you come to the microphone, please state your name, city, residence for the record, as this hearing will be recorded. Please speak clearly into the microphone and limit your testimony to 4 minutes.
Jean, has anyone snuck in? Okay. Would anyone like to discuss state shared revenue or have any comment?
Can we see the first slide again? I don't have anything to say. I just wanted to see it.
So Katie, when will they certify our population the next time?
It will be in December, mid-December of 2018.
Anyone else? Okay. I will now close the public hearing on the use of state revenue sharing. Any further discussion? Anyone else like to add any other comments before we close the meeting tonight? Well, with that said, thank you all for your time. The time is now 9:30. Meeting, okay, Joe?
I don't know if I said this. My intent is these different options of putting something together and getting it to you at least a few days before your next meeting, not coming to the meeting and presenting it. I want to get some, at least for you guys to chew on over a few days. That's my goal. So
Do you have time to do that?
We'll make time.
So our next scheduled meeting is Thursday, May 17th at 6 o'clock, which is a week from today. So what are you thinking? So when should we be taking a peek at email?
It will probably come Monday afternoon or Tuesday.
Okay. And then I would imagine it would be really helpful to you and to staff if after our review we were to submit questions.
Absolutely. If we were able to have questions by noon on Wednesday, just to have time to review them, and if I did need to run any more numbers in any models so that I had time Wednesday afternoon and Thursday morning, that would be extremely helpful.
Okay.
And we can do a reminder of that in the email as well to remind you of timelines.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Chair, I'd just like to thank Katie particularly and the rest of the staff for their diligence in putting together the budget and, presenting it the way they did. So thank you very much.
Meeting adjourned.